Yes.
The Leaf Spring Army sends its regards.
Hello, everyone. I'm the Enforcer, and I'm accompanied by Enforcer Matt.
And good evening, folks. It's Enforcer Matt, and welcome back to day 1277 of the War News stream. And we have some very serious news to cover today. We are seeing that Russia is preparing a false flag provocation on Estonia after they claim that Estonia is going to attack Russia very soon. Also, Ukrainian forces have multiple breakthroughs on the Russian front lines today, and also a major fire has erupted at a Russian nuclear power plant, and the Russians say it is safe, apparently, but we'll have to take them at their word for right now. But Enforcer, what say you?
And of course, we're going to be covering the past 24 hours of news from around the world, as we have been able to hear significant developments from the area of the state of Ukraine, as Ukrainian armed forces have been able to conduct massive and significant breakthroughs today against the Russian Federation's armed forces within the southern area of the Donetsk Oblast, near to the area of the Seberansky forest, and a breakthrough, according to the Russians, that is so significant near to the area of Mirnohrad that it may actually encircle the 132nd Motor Rifle Brigade, which recently just lost an entire battalion near to the area of the town of Hrushke and Kucherev Yar within the Kucherev Yar pocket. We have also been able to hear at the same time that Russian state media, apparently with the approval of the Russian Federation's government, has started to air stories that the Republic of Estonia is conducting and planning an armed invasion against the Russian Federation here within an incredibly short amount of time, preparing most likely for what may be described as a false flag attack, or an attempt to make it appear that the Russian Federation is under attack from Estonia, while the attack was completely coordinated and conducted by the Russian Federation to give them a proper casus belli to conduct what they would state is a merely defensive action, an attempted invasion of Estonia. We have also been able to hear at the same time that power went out across the entirety of the vital and strategically important Gotland Island off the coast of Sweden today for multiple hours, along with phone communications as well. It does appear that this may be a part of a larger action by the Russian Federation to continue their acts of sabotage. We have also been able to hear simultaneously that the Republic of Belgium Belarus has made a public statement that apparently the Iranians are asking them for help with rebuilding their air defense forces after the 12-day war concluded and also after the conclusion of Operation Midnight Hammer. We have also been able to hear even further additional news from the Korean DMZ as the South Koreans have finally published that 30 North Korean soldiers attempted to cross the border a few days ago, and that's what led to the warning shots being fired by the Republic of Korea's armed forces on the southern side of the border. The North Koreans also tested a new air defense system today, while right across the border, it appears that the Russians are finally getting that North Korean lifestyle update, as gas is now completely out in the entirety of Pokrovsk Krai, and fuel shortages are starting to grip the Russian Federation sporadically, showing that Russian fuel supplies have been stretched to their absolute bare limit and are at the breaking point. We have also been able to hear that flights were suspended in St. Petersburg and Volgograd today because of the Ukrainian drone attacks that were being conducted overnight. And we have also been able to hear inside of the Middle East that the Islamic Republic of Iran is continuing to generally try and praise their quote-unquote martyrs, while the Israelis are making more martyrs out of Hamas inside of the Gaza Strip at the moment. We have an absolutely massive amount of news to cover over the course of the night, and of course, these are only the big-ticket items. There's a load of minor details and information that we have to get into over the course of the night, and also, folks, tonight we actually have something a little bit special. It is the first time ever that on air, the Force Disposition Map will actually be used for its intended purpose. So that'll be a little bit interesting to see how y'all will appraise that segment, and whether y'all like that a great deal. But nevertheless, it is time for us to move on into the major breaking news of the night. And starting off with one of the craziest pieces of news, and also one of the more concerning pieces of news that we have today, coming out of the area of the Baltics, we have been able to hear that apparently the Russian state media is starting to spin a story that Estonia is preparing to attack Russia. This was stated today on the Russian state-run channel Russia 1, which is the main news channel and generally state-run television channel in the entirety of the Russian Federation. Russia 1 is literally channel 1 on all Russian television networks, meaning that anyone who has access to a Russian television has access to Russia 1. This is a statement that is somewhat concerning, considering that the Republic of Estonia is in no position to be able to conduct an offensive attack against really anyone for that matter, and not only that, the fact that the Russian Federation's Channel 1, which has always been assumed and is quite clearly operated by the state with approval from the Russian government for the kind of stories that they're putting out, is now spinning a story that there is a possibility of an armed attack being conducted by a Baltic state nation against the sovereign borders of the Russian Federation. Many people have started to say that this appears to be a preparation by the Russians to try and prepare what is described as a false flag attack. To quickly describe what a false flag is, it's pretty much described in the name itself. A false flag attack is where a country like Russia pretty much operates under a false flag, say the flag of Estonia, and pretty much pretends to attack themselves. This gives them, at least as far as the diplomatic side of things is concerned, the proper justification to quote-unquote, and with air quotes here, respond to the provocation or the armed attack, and then pretty much start out a full-blown war, and make it appear, at least on a public perspective, that it was a defensive action and not an offensive action from the Russian Federation that actually started the conflict. A false flag is very rare to actually have enough proof to say that a false flag did occur, but one false flag that has been undoubtedly verified is the Belsan bombings of the year 2000. The Belsan bombings occurred inside of Moscow in the year 2000, and resulted in the deaths of 500 Russian civilians, as several bombs planted in the basements of some of the apartment buildings in Moscow all detonated around the Belsan area, nearly destroying the apartment buildings outright and killing about 500 people inside of them. It has been verified through extensive amounts of debunking that this appears to have been an action conducted by the Russian FSB to give Vladimir Putin the proper ability to say that they were now operating in a defensive manner against the semi-autonomous, or at the time, autonomous Republic of Chechnya, which was claimed to have conducted these attacks against the Russian civilians inside the city of Moscow as an act of terrorism. That was what led the Russian Federation into the Second Chechen War, which lasted all the way from the year 2000 to 2009. This is something that appears to be trying to lay out a similar framework, as it's incredibly clear that the Republic of Estonia does not have the armed forces nor the capability to be able to conduct an armed offensive against the Russian Federation, or much less for that matter, actually conduct any level of national defense at any competency without greater support from an outside larger military power, such as another member of NATO. This actually brings us really quickly to the NATO-Ukraine CSTO force disposition map, which is an offshoot of the global force disposition map, which will be used to map and depict the entirety of all allied and enemy armed forces throughout the entirety of Europe here in the near future. This map is still, of course, a work in progress, and it only shows the Estonian and American forces on the map. It does not show the Russians, the Belarusians, the Ukrainians, or any other NATO states that have their forces inside of Europe at the moment. But to really quickly show you all this, that is all Estonia has. And to break this down a little bit further, the Estonian Ministry of Defense is the entirety of the armed forces of Estonia. This armed force is incredibly small, with only about 14 to 16,000 active service members, a decent amount of those being conscripts. The Estonian Air Force only exists on paper, according to what we were able to find later on today through the General Staff. The Estonian Air Force operates two, let me make sure here, M28 Skytrucks, and two L-39 trainer aircraft that were leased from the Czech Republic. Beyond that, the Air Force does not exist. So Estonia, in most instances or most cases, does not have an existing Air Force. This means that the only force that Estonia can count on, at least on the ground, is the Estonian Division, which is pretty much their version of the Estonian Army. The Estonian Division is only made up of 2 brigades, with each brigade having about 3.5 thousand men in them each, meaning that the actual ground forces, or the fighting men of Estonia, only range about 7,000 strong, and generally are not that incredibly strong at that. There are 2 brigades, the 1st Brigade and the 2nd Brigade. The 1st Brigade is the only competent fighting force that is inside of Estonia at the moment, from what we were able to tell. The 1st Infantry Brigade is comprised entirely of contract soldiers, while the 2nd Brigade is largely comprised entirely of Estonian reservists, meaning that they generally serve on a part-time basis, or as a lot of people in America would know it as, the weekend warrior. This means that the 1st Infantry Brigade is the only one that's professionally trained to a high level, and generally takes the job of soldiery not as a part-time profession, but a full-time profession. This means that Estonia does not actually have, at least in any measurable sense, enough manpower to even defend its complete border against the Russian Federation. If both of these ground brigades were completely mobilized along with the reservists of the 2nd Brigade, they would have an incredibly difficult time conducting anything further than a screening against invading Russian forces at the area of Narva or into the more southerly region around the Skav Plain, directly along their border. Anything beyond that would be completely out of Estonia's military capabilities and their military prowess, as they do not have an air force to count on for greater air-to-ground support to help to assist their 2 brigades, and not only that, we generally assume, at least on the larger part of analysis, that any reservist units, which the 2nd Brigade is made up entirely of reservists, would have a noticeable decrease in morale from the outset. They are not highly trained, and they generally do not have a great deal of cohesion due to their lack of experience on a day-to-day basis in terms of training, or really just experience, with the military structure. For that reason, their morale would most likely not hold up that long, even if they were on the defending side from an invading Russian force. This literally leaves the 1st Brigade and about 3.5 thousand men responsible for the defense of the entirety of the nation of Estonia. In short, what I'm outlining here is that Estonia does not have the manpower to even defend their country hardly, outside of further NATO support, which would be provided. This means that an offensive onto the Russian Federation is literally out of the question. They would not even be able to defend themselves against a Russian counterattack if that offensive was to fail. And not only that, 3.5 thousand men, or if we want to count the reservists as well in the 2nd Brigade, about 7,000 fighting men, do nothing whatsoever in terms of an offensive. To take St. Petersburg, it most likely would take about an offensive force of roughly 80,000 fighting men to make it down the highway from Narva to St. Petersburg, which is about a 50-mile stretch, besiege the city in about a couple of days, and then take it. And that is on the most optimistic timetable and optimistic sort of manpower and resource schedules that one could afford the NATO forces. This is something that does appear to not be a founded reality whatsoever that the Russian Federation is outlining, and not only that, it does sound like the Russian Federation is more so wanting to set themselves up for a false flag similar to that we would have seen at the Belsan bombings in Moscow in the year 2000. And Matthew, what are people thinking about this, and what are you thinking about it as well?
All right. So with Russia claiming that Estonia is going to launch a preemptive strike on Russia, honestly, it reminds me of the start of the Ukraine war. The Russians were saying that there were allegedly Nazis in Kyiv and that the Nazis were encroaching on the Russian border and they planned to attack the Russian civilians. And that was the propaganda leading right up to the attack that we saw by Russia and the full-scale invasion into Ukrainian territory. So this appears to be textbook Russian strategy right here. When they start claiming that someone's going to attack Russia, that's basically setting them up for a false flag attack by that country, allegedly speaking, and then Russia uses that to justify an attack on Estonia. So to me, it sounds like it could be prep for a false flag attack. Of course, it's very early to say that. The Russian state media just started pushing that narrative today, and it's being pushed on their main primary propaganda channel. So it's not like it's some random back channel. This is one of their main ones that's being pushed on, which tells us since the government controls those channels, or at least heavily influences those channels, this must be a narrative being pushed by government sources and being pushed to the media outlets to disseminate to all the people of Russia. So it's essentially preparing the people for that possibility. And when that starts happening, that is something to keep a very close eye on because they're honing in on one Baltic state, which is Estonia. They're not picking all three of them. They're not saying it's NATO as a whole. They're specifically honing in on Estonia, which has very limited capabilities to attack or defend its territory. So I would say it's very concerning. I'm with the 56%. It sounds like prep for a false flag attack. But Enforcer, what say you?
I would have to go with the 56%. It definitely is a false flag preparation. And I also have to explain to many, because I do see a lot of people bringing up probably the most important point to this. Estonia is not alone. Yes, the Estonian military is incredibly weak. I'll have to be entirely honest with you all. After doing my research and analysis today to represent them properly on the force disposition map, they are far weaker than I even imagined, just to be completely frank. But that's also something that kind of extends throughout the entirety of the Baltic states, but it'll take a while for me to be able to map that out properly on the disposition map. This takes a lot of time to be able to research and develop this thing. But outside of that, one thing that is incredibly important to note is that, yes, Estonia is in NATO, but NATO is a defensive alliance. It is not a military alliance in raw form, where it can be used in the offensive and defensive. This means that if the Russian Federation is able to create a convincing enough false flag attack on themselves and claim that the Estonians conducted that attack, that means that Estonia may be argued in the NATO alliance to not be necessary to give NATO protections. Because if the Russians attack themselves, just to put this out there, if the Russians attack themselves and they make it look like the Estonians actually were the ones to attack them, technically, at that point, if most NATO countries believe that, and it is convincing enough that we don't have evidence beyond a shadow of a doubt to prove that was not the case, it actually does look like Estonia went on the offensive against the Russians. If that's what it actually ends up looking like, that means that the Estonians technically were the aggressor, and that there will be no NATO Article 5 protections for them, because technically the Russians would be responding to an attack on their own sovereign borders. That is why this false flag is somewhat important, or at least the kind of narrative that they're already starting to push about this is incredibly concerning. If everyone went with that and just believed it, Estonia could be left on their own. An attacking country in NATO is not given any Article 5 provisions or protections if they're responded to by the country that they technically attacked. That's why this sort of a false flag is an important thing to note and an important thing to bring up and raise the alarm about, because the Russian Federation is already trying to position itself, or more so set up the gears, so that way when things start rolling, it looks like the Estonians may have actually gone on the offensive against the Russians, instead of the truth of the matter, which is that the Russians attacked themselves to make it appear that the Estonians attacked them in turn. So that
And also, I would say, out of all the Baltic states that Russia could try to attack to test the NATO resolve, to see how NATO's response would be to an invasion of a NATO territory, basically at all, Estonia probably would be the state that Russia would pick. It seems to be the one farthest away geographically. Also, it appears to be less defended than the others, in my personal opinion, and that would be the one they'd go for. And specifically, since they're honing in on that one, that does suggest that the likelihood is rising that they might try to aggress on Estonia just to see how NATO would respond to it. The worst thing NATO could do if Russia did something to Estonia, invaded it, sent missiles into it, drones, etc., worst thing NATO could do is say, we have bigger fish to fry. We're going to let Estonia handle that on their own. We're just going to send them weapons. Worst thing they could possibly do. And right now at this point, I'm not sure if they would actually send troops on the ground to Estonia, or at least send troops toward the region. I'm not really sure what NATO would do at this point. I would hope they would send troops, but it's kind of up in the air, at least in my personal view.
I would have to say that it probably is a the situation that has to be taken with a great deal of concern. I'll see a lot of people discounting this off the bat and saying that this would be stupid. Nobody would believe this. I would generally say that nobody would believe this as the Russians conducted it. However, we also have to put into mind a lot of other factors that many people seem to want to blatantly ignore. And that's the fact that the President of the United States currently doesn't really seem to be one to want to face down the Russians, because it looks like the new 2 weeks, and we'll wait and see sort of a statement, is already starting to move into the category of waffling, where it ends up becoming unlimited 2 weeks in salads, or soups and salads if you want to put it that way. So the Russian Federation may be seeing that, and may also see, to lay out a couple of other things, that drone that flew about 70 miles into Poland and exploded and ended up damaging a couple of houses inside of the village of Oshina didn't really result in any major sort of response by the Polish, or all of the drones that have exploded down near the area of the Danube River Delta, near to the Ukrainian border. None of those really seem to have elicited a response, or any of the Russian drones that flew over Vilnius in Lithuania, or the Russian drones that flew all the way across the border past the Latvian city of Resigne. None of them really got any response. Nobody's giving really any response to the Russians right now, and as a matter of fact, it appears that we're still generally waffling on our position with the state of Ukraine, and whether or not we really will be there with them till the finish to try and help them out in the war against the Russian Federation, even if the Russians continue to show that they are operating in bad faith. All of those sorts of things are coming together to give the Russian Federation a picture that if they do conduct a false flag attack, even if the story is completely unbelievable that the Estonians attacked the Russians to us here in the public, many administrations or governments out there here in the West may take that story at face value just so that way they can back off and see that this doesn't turn into a larger NATO conflict and the Estonians might be left to dry out. A lot of people said that that sort of a thing wouldn't happen to the Czechs at the 1938 Munich conference. They were technically a part of the alliance of the British, the French, and the Polish, as well as the Czechs. In fact, the Czechs were in a separate alliance with the Polish themselves, and once the Germans started their provocations against the Czechs, everyone left the Czechs out to dry. It's not something out of the question to say that these sorts of dangerous stories and rhetorics from the Russians do not have some possible credence to them. And in terms of diplomatic plays, you have to treat these as though they are serious, imminent threats to the security of the state of Estonia and also the security of the entirety of the North Atlantic Treaty Organization as a whole. That is something that
And also, with Russia knowing that Estonia is not a powerhouse, they're definitely not a military powerhouse. Now, we're not discounting them all the way. Me personally, Estonia has a lot of spirit behind their fighters. They're very, very much like the Ukrainians in large ways, very apt to defend their territory. They have the spirit and the heart of the warrior, I guess you could say, behind them. But that can only get you so far, though. If you don't have enough men and you don't have enough equipment, you'll need NATO assistance, or otherwise your country will be in deep trouble when it comes to a prolonged conflict between the Russians and Estonia. So they'll need that. But since the Russians know that Estonia is not really capable of launching a preemptive strike on Russia and really making a dent in their defenses, for them to say that and start pushing that narrative on their state TV, there's literally only one likely answer. It's either paranoia, which, that is possible. The Russians are paranoid, but considering it's on state media, it's not just some random propagandist. This is state Russian media saying this. It's usually, like we were saying historically, this is usually the setup for some type of false flag operation. So it looks likely leaning that way. I really don't see any other reason they would actually push that unless there was maybe just a lot of paranoia running around the newsroom, I guess you could say. But I really don't think that's the case.
Also, by the way, I'd have to quickly explain to some people the situation, at least if we were to see a hypothetical scenario where the Russians pulled that off. Hopefully, I can get a better depiction of this in the coming days. This is taking a long time to make this thing. But Estonia only has, on actual ledgers, 2 operational brigades. That is not a lot of manpower. That is approximately 7,000 combat troops. And not all the forces inside of these brigades are even fighting battalions, because a brigade is made up of about 8 battalions each. That's usually the running number. The 1st Brigade is made up only of, I believe, if I'm correct, 2 mechanized infantry battalions, and pretty much all the other battalions are supporting those 2 infantry battalions. That means in terms of actual fieldable infantry, the 1st Brigade has roughly about 1,600 1,500 men, or about 1,400 men if we're going with a lighter battalion structure, to put up against the Russians with rifles that will be able to shoot at them, along with their CV-9030s, providing them support in the infantry fighting vehicle role, as that is a part of a mechanized infantry battalion. That is all, like, in terms of the infantry, that's all the infantry available in the 1st Infantry Brigade. The rest of everyone else in the 1st Infantry Brigade are engineers in the anti-aircraft units, in the combat service support battalions, which repair the armored fighting vehicles and keep them running, and also some of them, about 120 men, are in an anti-tank company that operates anti-tank guided missile launchers, like a TOW-2 or some other form of an anti-tank weapon along those lines, like a Milan 2 from France. That's what the 1st Brigade has to offer. The 2nd Brigade is similar, at least on paper. The problem is that everyone in the 2nd Infantry Brigade, except for the Kupriyanov Infantry Battalion, are all reservists. So these guys are all pretty much called up to serve, kind of on a weekend warrior sort of a basis, and are conscripts. That means that in terms of their quality of training, and also in terms of their cohesion and morale, it is always expected that reservists will have lower morale because they are going to be going up, most likely, against contract-trained troops. With that in mind, with only 7,000 men in the Estonian armed forces that are in a combatant role in both of these brigades, the Russians would only, in hypothetical terms, if they're looking for a 3-to-1 attacker's advantage, need an invading force of about 21 to 27,000 men to actually have a 3 or 4-to-1 attacking advantage against the Estonians, which generally puts the ballpark of winning that offensive completely in your park. There's no way to lose at that point. You have so many numbers in terms of manpower, it would be very hard for the Estonians to conduct a proper defensive without slowly being pushed back through their country, and most likely towards major cities like Tallinn or the city of Tartu, which would most likely pose to be a significant defensive fortification if the Russians were to invade the country. That's if they're left on their own. If NATO was to respond, the Russians most likely would not attack, but the problem is, folks, is that we don't know if NATO would respond. NATO keeps on, in some sense or form, being directly provoked by the Russians. The Polish, just a few days ago, deemed the Oshina attack as a direct armed provocation by the Russians. And what was the Polish response? The Polish response was to send a letter to the Russians that said, "We are very, very angry in Poland about you hitting us, Mr. Putin, and we don't like that." That was their response, and that was it. That was the only response to a bomb going off that was 500 pounds of explosives right next to a small village 70 miles in Poland. That was the response. So there is nothing to say at this point. Estonia may or may not be on its own, or every country in NATO might actually, in real practicality, may have to fend for itself, because there's no guarantee that anyone else in NATO may come to their aid if they come under an attack. There's no strong responses for the larger part. But still, I do see a lot of people talking about the situation right now, and a lot of people have been asked the question, if Russia invaded Estonia and took a large portion of the territory, could Russia invade Estonia and take a large part of the territory and possibly use nukes to deter a NATO response? And Matthew, what are people thinking about that, and what are you thinking about that as well?
So it looks like 61% of the audience said yes, Russia could invade Estonia, take a large portion of their territory, and then ward off NATO and deter a NATO response through the nuclear threat. That could be a reality, and 61% said that. And 38% said no, Russia will not be able to deter NATO using the nuclear threat. Now, that is the only thing, in my opinion, that might embolden Russia to do something as crazy as invading a Baltic state, is because, of course, they always have that nuclear umbrella to fall back on. Because if Russia goes into Estonia and Russia did not have nukes, then it would be an easy equation. All NATO would do is simply invoke Article 5, they would send troops over to Estonia, and they would start whooping ass on the Russian troops that try to invade a NATO country. That would be a pretty straightforward operation. It may take some fighting, may take some time, but it would be pretty straightforward. The problem is, though, Russia has the dead man's hand, basically. They have the nuclear threat, and if Russia goes into Estonia, they get their troops embroiled in a fight on the ground with the Estonians, and the Estonians put up a valiant fight. NATO might think in their head, look, it's just Estonia, even though Estonia is important, we can maybe not respond to Estonia because we risk a nuclear response from Russia if we get into direct conflict with them. That's what NATO could think, depending on where NATO's head of space is, basically, at the time of this attack that Russia tries to pull off. So the nuclear thing is a huge threat. And I'm not saying it's invalid. Like, it is a serious threat. Like, if Russia decides to start nuking people, that ends up in a nuclear exchange between multiple countries in NATO, which could be horrible. So But at the same time, though, this is the problem. This is the first time we're ever facing this issue in history in a real world scenario. And this is going to be the first test, if this happens and Russia does invade, of what NATO is going to do to counter the nuclear threat. Are we going to start threatening nukes in return to counterattack Russia with nuclear weapons if they threaten that? Or are we simply going to back down and let Russia take Estonia and hope they don't go any further? That's the big question.
I see some people saying some things in the chat. I actually see some Estonian viewers saying, well, actually, we've been told that if a war starts, we immediately mobilize, and then we bump up to a 230,000 strong armed force. That is true, at least in theory, but the problem is that Estonia is not a large country. Estonia, at its longest in length, is 150 miles in depth and approximately somewhere about 120 miles tall, so pretty much a perfectly shaped cube, at least in terms of its borders. That is not an incredibly large area, and also considering that mobilization takes time, which is something that you really wouldn't have if the Russians preemptively invade you at the outset, that most likely means that nobody would really have a time to mobilize or to be able to prepare their mobilization efforts to be able to raise a force that large to be able to conduct a proper defense. On top of that, in terms of vehicular equipment, or what you could say is called a firepower multiplier, there's not a lot of it in Estonia. They have on paper and in storage about 70 APCs. 45 of those are currently in service of the 1st Brigade. About another 30 of those are inside of storage at the moment, meaning that if they were to try and apply those APCs to the armed force, they have an additional 30 at their command, meaning possibly a whole other brigade similar to the 1st Brigade being raised. But most infantry involved in that kind of a battle would be dismounted foot infantry, as the military just does not have the available or requisite equipment to be able to supply or motorize 230,000 forces, even with armored personnel carriers, meaning that the fight still would generally be in the favor of the Russians if they're motorized at a minimum, because they would be able to outmaneuver Estonian defense forces. So it seems as though, in my opinion, this is a fairly precarious situation. Estonia is not designed, by the way, as far as their military is structured, to fight on their own. Their entire military is structured off of the concept that NATO will come to their defense, because it is supposed to be an entire international military alliance that is also defending them, and they are also in turn contributing to that alliance as well. That is the general theory and plan. If they are left on their own, because everyone wants to go with the silly Russian story that'd be put out that the Estonians attacked them, and everyone just said, oh, well, that's good enough for us to stay back and act like this is too complicated to get involved in, they could be left on their own, and that sort of a situation is a little bit concerning, at least at this point to me, but still a fairly interesting development from the Russian Federation. But with that, it is time for us to move on into some other major news about the Russian Federation, because while they are trying to line up their cards to try and possibly conduct a false flag attack with the Estonians, we have been able to hear that the Ukrainian armed forces have been having an insanely huge amount of success today in the area of Ukraine, and more in particular inside of the Donbass. Because we all know the war in Ukraine is happening in Ukraine, but where is it happening in Ukraine? It's happening in the Donbass. And I guess you could say that the Ukrainians are putting the ass in Donbass, because it sounds as though they're starting to kick some of that today. We were able to hear that the Ukrainians have started to counterattack near to the area of Mirnorad, which is just where the 132nd Motorized Rifle Brigade actually lost an entire battalion after an attempted breakthrough at Mirnorad, which advanced as far north as Zolotokolodias, and the lost battalion was last seen and heard of near Kucherev Yar and being pushed rapidly north by the 93rd, which was destroying the last remnants of the lost battalion at our last report. We were able to hear that today more Ukrainian brigades from the area of Mirnorad are now conducting a counterattack within this area. It appears that this counterattack is primarily being conducted by that of the 425th Air Assault Regiment, which appears to have conducted a limited breakthrough near to the town of Mirne, which is just outside of the city of Mirnorad. It appears that at this moment, according to the Russians, if this offensive keeps up at its pace, there may be an entire brigade-level element, or several brigade-level elements, that may be encircled around the area of the town of Novotoretsk, and also near to the area of Shevchenko-Pershe, which is just behind the line to the east of where the main line of contact is right now with the Ukrainian forces at the village of Nikoroivka, and also Zadyshak. So it does appear that at the moment, the Ukrainian armed forces have completely turned the situation around, not only destroying the lost battalion, but now it also appears they're conducting a counterattack that does have the potential of possibly cutting off 2 or 3 Russian brigades, not battalions, from the front line. Also, to give you all a little bit little bit of a heads up on that. The reason why this is a lot more significant than the Lost Battalion, the Lost Battalion was a battalion. A single brigade is made up of around 7 or 8 battalions. So that means that there are about 21 battalions that could be encircled by this action if the Russians do not stop the Ukrainians from continuing their offensive. This was also corroborated later on the day by reports from Russian military bloggers, such as reporter Filatov, who stated, "I wonder what the meters and centimeters of propaganda will say about the actions of the 5 in the Pokrovsk direction. Is this a cunning plan? Is this an academic strategy that I cannot understand because I'm so stupid? Okay, let's leave the sarcasm, but maybe Mr. Slatkov and Mr. Solovov can enlighten the ignoramus. Preferably not emotional bullshit, but facts." And then another update came out. Mirai, Gorodog village community, Donetsk People's Republic, territory of Russia temporarily occupied by Ukraine. Groups of the Ukrainian armed forces entered the settlement. Fighting is ongoing. This is the update that came a little bit later in the day that started to state that the 425th was beginning to make its advance into the Russian lines and was breaking through. The guys from the side explained how this happened. While other units operating on the flanks were making real advances, the command of the 5th Separate Motorized Rifle Brigade, which is south of the 132nd, which reported on the capture of Konomichevsky, does not actually control the positions it declared, which allowed the enemy groups to pass into Mirny. So basically, a Russian commander lied. There was a giant gap in the line that they just left right behind them, and the 425th just literally walked right into it. So right now, at this moment, the 5th Separate Motorized Rifle Brigade, or a large part of its battalions, may actually be threatened with encirclement, because the 425th is now technically behind them. And now as a result of such reports, there are battles in the conditional rear, risks of loss of logistics, and encirclement of other units. So it does appear that at the moment, the situation is now starting to progress from being not ideal for the Russians north of Pokrovsk near Mirnorad. It is now absolutely deadly, because several brigades may actually end up being encircled, including the 132nd and the 5th Separate Motor Rifle Brigade, which is also threatened with encirclement right now by the 425th Air Assault Regiment. We also got to see, by the way, folks, we also got to hear that some of the Lost Battalion guys actually did survive. Would you believe it, Matthew? They actually survived and ran back to their lines on the southern end, because the last time we heard about them, just to remind you all of this, and actually, let me use my map here because this one actually models it well. The last we heard, they were near Kucherev Yar right here, and the 93rd had pushed them out of the town into this valley right here. The 93rd kept pushing them on up towards Hrushke, and that's pretty much where the Lost Battalion completely disintegrated. We stopped hearing about them even being engaged, and it appears that the remnants of the battalion completely scattered. The unit was quite literally shattered, meaning it ceased to exist, and whoever was left was fending for themselves. Some of them actually made the several-mile jaunt, or somehow escaped through the Ukrainian lines, several miles all the way down to the area of Popov Yar, where the 132nd is right now, somewhere in between there and Shevchenko-Perche. We have been able to hear that after they made it back, the Russians punished them by forcing them to walk into the minefields that are in front of them. Like, and they actually have a video of it, believe it or not. Like, they don't have a video of any of them getting detonated, but they forced them to start walking through the minefields to clear them out. So these guys were lucky to even survive the 93rd's assault on Kucherev Yar and the Kucherev Yar pocket, and then the further disintegration of their unit. They then finally made it back to the Russian lines, and instead of being treated as though they were lucky survivors, they were punished and forced to walk in front of the armed soldiers of the 132nd to clear out the minefields.
That is crazy, honestly. It's almost like they wanted these guys to get taken out.
Yeah, and they called him a deserter. It's crazy because his unit, like, just to explain the insanity of this, folks, the unit shattered. There was nothing left. This guy was lucky to even survive. Like, just being completely fair to these Russians here, this guy was lucky to have survived. Russian units, or any unit for that matter, rarely ever shatters from taking such heavy losses and being pretty much obliterated by offensives from a group like the 93rd. It's very rare to hear of this. This guy is lucky to even be alive and to have made it back to the line. He made it back to the line, and they're calling him a deserter. He made it back to the line. He didn't surrender to the Ukrainians. He didn't abandon his unit. His unit ceased to exist. He tried to return back to the line, to return to the command of the 132nd Brigade, and this is how they treat the guy. They're now forcing him to walk through a minefield.
Шкоду, нахуй. Мы 132-ю быстро, нахуй, с таких воспитываем, нахуй. Ну,
You
короче,
know, I just
сейчас
noticed the
узнаете.
problem though with
Шарик.
this. You see the problem that I'm seeing?
He's way too close. If this guy steps on a mine, they're
Yeah.
both going.
I think the commander might have the IQ of a shrimp on a treadmill because he's literally standing within 5 or 10 feet of the guy that's literally about to hit the mine. So that's pretty stupid.
Yeah, like this is a really stupid sort of a thing, but
Куда его? Улыбнись.
so the cameraman asks, where are we going with him? And he's saying, let's check what's up ahead, meaning that they're walking into a minefield.
По минам, птички, не птички. Вот с такими так и надо.
Повернись. Да тебе
And he's
нахуй-
saying, guys, chill out, because he's like, I literally just survived hell on earth, escaping the pocket at Kucher Vyar, and then also getting obliterated at Hrushke. Can you all just chill out? He's like, no, I will shoot you if you do not stop turning around.
Слушай,
This is
погоню, нахуй.
absolute
Давай,
insanity.
шагай, сука, еще километров 7 хуярить, нахуй. Долбоеб, сука.
7 more kilometers. Well, damn, man, they're gonna make him walk to death too. That's bad right there. This is just like ridiculous, honestly. They send these guys out here like it's almost like they have a quota to eliminate these guys or something. Like they just want them to be eliminated.
It's just absolutely insane at this point. I do not know what's wrong with the Russians as a whole, but taking a guy who survived impossible odds and then forcing him to walk through a minefield, you can't really get much worse than this. But it does make it obviously clear that the 132nd Motor Rifle Brigade doesn't deserve any sympathy from the outside world, because that is an absolutely cutthroat and damn villainous sort of a brigade to ever see. So I'd actually say that if the commanders of the 132nd Brigade's battalion, the Lost Battalion, were wiped out in that attack from the 93rd at Kucher Vyar, that guy was lucky to see that his commanders were wiped out in that attack, because if they were like these guys, the rest of them in the brigade, that is absolutely horrendous. But nevertheless, a lot of people have been talking about how should NATO respond if Russia invaded a country like Estonia. And Matthew, what are people thinking about that, and what are you thinking about that as well?
All right, so this was a poll about our first topic. Jumping back to it real quick, away from our frontline developments real quick. The question once again says, how should NATO respond if Russia invades and then uses nukes as a shield against NATO? Because I saw a lot of people debating this, so I was curious to see what the poll results would be. So 68% said send troops to fight Russia anyway if Estonia is invaded, while 20% said threaten nuke counterstrikes first, and 7% said first negotiate Russia away from the nukes. And I would say if Russia does something as crazy as invading Estonia, which that is diabolical and also absolutely asinine if they did something like that, I would say that there is no hope in hell of negotiating with Russia for anything at that point. Russia is pretty much hell-bent on the country's destruction at that point if they do something that crazy. So negotiations completely ruled out. That better not even be pursued at all. That's going to be a complete waste of time and also dangerous for the entire NATO alliance. So I would say I wouldn't even send troops in the fight at first, I'll be honest with you. If Russia is threatening to use nukes on NATO, I would say we're going to stop right here before we deploy any troops, and we're going to literally call that bluff, and Russia can decide, do you really want to start a nuclear war right now, or are you just bluffing? Because I personally don't think that Putin, as a lunatic as he is, I don't think he's ready to throw it all away in a nuclear war. Me personally, I think that's a big bluff, and he knows he can't win on the ground, so he has to lean on the nuclear threat. So I would say call the bluff right then and there. Let's see if he's serious. And if he's not serious, or if he is, we got to stop him somewhere. So we can't just indefinitely get on the back foot and say, okay, Putin, you can do whatever you want. Eventually, you got to stare him down, because you can't just let him start taking land, use nukes as a shield, and then keep moving through the Baltics. That's what he would do if he invaded Estonia. So I'm with the 20%. But Enforcer, what say you?
I would have to say that, in my opinion, I think that we should threaten nuclear weapons as a response if the Russian Federation begins to threaten nukes. It does not matter if we met them in combat at that point. We will meet them in combat, however, but at the same time, we need to threaten nuclear destruction as an equal countermeasure to theirs. That is something that I would have to say would be the immediate response. Estonia is a NATO state, a part of the North Atlantic Treaty Organization. And considering that the Russians are putting out this sort of a claim, and I want to make this somewhat clear, I do not believe the Russian claim whatsoever. And if something like that even appeared to look like it was going to happen, that's not the case. Clearly, the Estonians wouldn't attack the Russians. That would be absolutely stupid. They would lose. And they also would be giving up, pretty much forfeiting any ability to get Article 5 protections if they actually did attack Russia first. And on top of that, the Estonian civil administration, which is the government, has made it incredibly clear they don't want to attack Russia. They're scared to death of the Russians because the Russians are bloodthirsty maniacs. So with that in mind, all of that put together, it's incredibly clear that they are subject to Article 5 protections under the treaty. if the Russians started to say that the Estonians attacked them, and oh boo-hoo-hoo, this is terrible, and we have to respond, and we're going to liquidate the Estonian government because they're a threat to us, and if anyone responds, we're going to nuke them, I would have to say, well, we will see you in hell first. That would be my response if I was the President of the United States. Nobody is going to start sweeping away nations in the NATO alliance off of these stupid sorts of claims and sorts of rhetoric that the Russian Federation keeps putting out. If they want to threaten nuclear war, we'll give them a nuclear war. They're going to stop threatening that, or else there's going to be serious consequences at this point for the Russian Federation. We are not going to compromise the NATO alliance. We are not going to compromise the American sphere of influence in Europe, or generally the major European power of the European Union that is not only a major economic power, but through NATO is also the second largest military power on the planet behind the United States of America. That will not be sacrificed to satiate the insane demands of a dictator in the Russian Federation that once we give up Estonia, they'll be demanding Latvia, Lithuania, and parts of Poland, as well as the remainder of Ukraine beyond that point. This is where the buck stops. The buck is going to stop here and no further. Estonia isn't just a small country in the Baltics. It is a NATO state like any other. It is as important to the defensive alliance as the United Kingdom, Germany, France, and the United States for the mere principle that it is a part of our defensive alliance, and it is subject to the same protections under the Article 5 section of the treaty that any other member state would have. This is going to be where the line is drawn, and if there are no leaders inside of the NATO alliance at the moment, in any of these countries that are willing to draw the line here, then that means that there is no line to be drawn, and pretty much as everyone is every man for themselves at this point inside of the NATO alliance. So with that,
And also, for all the people saying that sounds harsh, because I will admit that does sound very harsh, and also it sounds very escalatory to say that if Russia threatens nukes against NATO, then we should immediately threaten nukes against them in return, and basically have a nuclear stare down or a standoff. That sounds a little bit extreme, but at the same time, though, a mutually assured destruction, which is the nuclear doctrine that's generally been followed between the Western countries, that is still in effect. That is generally the doctrine in which the West follows, and that is supposed to ensure that countries like Russia that have nukes, and also the West that also has nukes as well, generally does not aggress on each other, or they do risk a complete nuclear annihilation in an exchange. So we need to adhere to the MAD doctrine. If we don't adhere to it, then countries like Russia that want to use nukes as a shield to basically conduct horrible armed operations against their neighbors and neighboring states, that's going to become commonplace, which is as dangerous as a nuclear exchange. Because if a country, imagine this, imagine if Germany had nuclear weapons when Hitler was in charge, and he did this. What were we going to do? Or were we just going to let Hitler ravage Europe and take everything over and simply stand back and say, oh, we can't risk a nuclear exchange, that might annihilate the world? Surely you wouldn't advocate for that, because otherwise Hitler would have taken everything over. So that's what we got to do with Russia. The first time we're ever dealing with this, it's a bit scary, but we need to deal with it head on, straight on, and don't be fearful whatsoever of the consequences, because the alternative is Putin takes everything over in the Baltics and starts taking over Europe, and the West is basically frozen in fear because they're worried about a nuke.
I would have to say that as far as I would be concerned, if Estonia is given up, which is an actual NATO state, then that means every country in NATO is no longer a part of the alliance. If the Article 5 protections do not work once, they never will work again. They're done. And so that is something that's a little bit concerning, because I know how this is going to be sold to the public by everyone if that happened. Estonia is a little country. It only has a GDP of, $43 billion. It's equivalent to a small billionaire here in the United States. It's not that big of a deal. Their military wasn't really that big. There wasn't a lot of people living in Estonia, and it wasn't really that crucial. I mean, it's something that we could give up, if we had to, for the greater element of peace. That's what would be said. And they would say, well, it's not like we're losing Poland or Germany or Britain or France. I mean, it's not like a major power or anything. And at that point, we might as well say that everyone's on their own, because then that means Finland, Sweden, Norway, no NATO protections, just not big enough to care. That's what would be said. All the rest of the Baltics, not big enough to care. So the Russians would eventually push the envelope to where they would start to do something against Poland. And then Poland's not going to roll over, because Poland has a large enough military that it would be a damn fight to the finish, like it is in Ukraine right now, to try try and take over the Polish. So then at that point, they're going to sit there and actually survive long enough that it's going to become a larger issue. Or it's going to get to the point that the United States is going to be threatened directly, and then we have no choice but to get into a war. But at that point, we pretty much sold out all of our friends and allies along the way, and there's hardly anything left. That's what that is. And people are not getting that. Like, I see a lot of people who want to argue that in the chat about, oh, nobody would do that, and Estonia is a part of NATO. And you're not thinking critically on this. Yes, they're a part of NATO. Yes, they are not going to be alone. But you have to consider that right now, there is a lot of waffling going on in the NATO alliance about what will be done. The Polish government was the biggest, most apt at the beginning of the war. Oh, we're going to go defend Ukraine. We're going to go defend against the Russians. The Russians aren't going to screw us over again like they did in the Molotov-Ribbentrop Act of 1939. Never again. A drone blows up on their territory. Can you please stop hitting our country with bombs? That's not the kind of response that you would expect from a country that's been saying for years now that they are more than willing to go to war with the Russians for their common defense of not only their nation, but NATO. The United States keeps on waffling between, we love the Russians and the Russians are full of shit, and keeps on doing that every single 2 weeks, to the point that it's unclear what our position is on the Russians anymore at this point. Do we hate them? Do we like them? Do we think they're playing us for clowns? What do they think? We don't even know. It's hard to tell. These sorts of actions in leadership at the moment, not just by Poland, but by the United States and by multiple other NATO states, is starting to put it out there to the Russians. We might be able to push this envelope all the way. Kind of into that sort of a Donetsk situation that started World War II in Europe. We might be able to push it that far and then some.
I know. That's what my concern is. Like, for example, when we were talking about the drone going into Poland the other day, all of that stuff, I'm a very strong believer that every single action you see Russia doing, they're intentional about it. That's not accidental. I know that everybody says, oh, the Russians are incompetent. And yes, they are incompetent on the front line scenarios, but they're not incompetent when it comes to sending a drone all the way into Poland. That is way beyond incompetence. That is intentional. Like, there's no way in my mind that that was unintentional. And they're doing that not because they're just trying to, get even with Poland. They're doing it for a specific strategic reason to find out what is NATO going to do in response, because they're trying to get the gist in their minds. How far is NATO going to go if we push the envelope and go invade something in Estonia, Latvia, Lithuania? Is NATO really going to have a strong response or not? Every time Putin meets with the U.S. president, he's also basically sizing them up just like a bully would to see if he thinks that this guy's going to actually respond to his bully tactics. And every single time, I'll be honest with you, it's not confidence inspiring, because so far what Putin has gotten a gist of is that NATO is really, really apt to avoid war at all costs. That appears to be the case right now, and especially with Russia, because for some reason, the U.S. is viewing Russia as an omnipotent force right now. Even though they're getting their asses kicked in Ukraine and everywhere else they're fighting, they're viewed as omnipotent because they have nuclear weapons. And Putin thinks in his head, oh, they're really scared of those nukes. Like, they are horrified of the nukes. I can use that to my advantage. And I think that's what we're going to see him do if the West doesn't really wise up and start getting strong against Vladimir Putin.
I would agree completely. And it's a very concerning sort of a situation, and I'm trying to lay out the point of concern as much as I can to all of y'all. This isn't fear-mongering, because that's what a lot of people said, and I was one of those people who were one of those detractors before the invasion of Ukraine. Oh, everyone's saying that the Russians are going to invade Ukraine. They're just full of it. The Russians would never do such a thing. They've sworn up and down to everyone they wouldn't do such a thing, and then they did it. Like, it's like you have the perfect example in front of you to say that if you were a pig at a pig farm and the butcher just walked up to the pig in front of you and slit its throat with a knife, might be time for slaughter. Like, you might be the next pig up for slaughter at this point. Probably the next reasonable sort of an assumption to make if you're a pig at a slaughterhouse. So this isn't something to say that this is out of the question. I mean, Putin's already gone up to Ukraine, in a figurative sense, a pig at a slaughterhouse, and tried to slit its throat. NATO's next. Where in the world does this end? And where in the world do we draw the line and say, we need to make sure to put our foot down so that we're not the next pig up in line at the slaughterhouse at this point?
Yeah, true that. And we're not even pigs. And also, those pigs in the slaughterhouse line, are they really thinking about that? They're like, hey, wait a minute, am I next? Like, are the pigs really thinking that?
Man, what they're thinking about is, brother, may I have some oats?
Exactly.
But nevertheless, I hope that does kind of get the point across the best we can, at least here on the channel. But with that, it is time for us to move on into some other major news that we have been able to hear from around the area. Because we have also been able to hear that things are getting worse inside of Russia, and I mean really worse. But before we get into all of that, I do want to take a little bit of a break for a moment to be able to chit-chat with all of y'all for a second, and then get on into the rest of the news for the night. So Matthew, what do we got?
All right. So also, folks, stick around because we got some big news coming up as well. We spent a long time on that topic right there because obviously it's a very concerning one, but also we got crazier news coming up even beyond this one. But jumping into our first super chat, this one goes to LC39A, excuse me, who puts in a $140 donation. And thank you very much, good sir, for that massive support yet again. And we appreciate that very, very much. And LC39A, by the way, and we've been saying this for weeks at this point, but thank you very much, good sir, for always throwing in that support because it does help to keep the channel running. And he did not leave a comment, actually, or actually did he leave a comment? He said, hello, Enforcers, and hello to you, good sir. And Enforcer, what say you?
And I gotta say a big hello to you, LC39A, and a massive thanks to you once again for the incredible support and helping this channel to keep running. If it wasn't for folks like you, we would not be able to keep this channel running, we wouldn't be able to make this thing possible, and we wouldn't have been able to keep this thing rolling up until this day. And so I gotta say an incredible, massive thanks to you so much once again, because if it wasn't for folks like you, we wouldn't be able to say hello to the whole of the LSA and yourself. And I gotta say that we were massively appreciative of your support. You've been throwing in massive support every day for what seems to be weeks, and I gotta say that we are massively appreciative of that, and thank you greatly, because your support has been helping us to keep this channel running and make this thing possible. So massive thanks to you so much once again. Hope that does address that well. And with that, we are on to the next one.
Also, by the way, I want to make a point real quick. I see a lot of people, and I understand why people are skeptical, because obviously invading a NATO country, that would be a monumental escalation by Russia, one that would be very hard to believe until you see it. But I remember, this harkens back to 2022, before I was even on this channel, actually. I was talking to everybody, because at the time I was still in college, and I was still a political science major at the time. I was discussing this with professors, students, etc., and also with Andrew and my family, etc. And I was saying, that all the signs indicate that Russia's about to invade. I said, this is about to happen. And I was in private, like slightly, not slightly, but actually very worried that they were about to invade. And everybody said, oh no, Matthew, you're crazy. They're not going to invade Ukraine. That would be insane for Russia to do that. It wouldn't make any sense. I said, but look, they're literally saying that they're about to be attacked by Ukraine. They're saying NATO's encroaching on them. They've got men on the border, like in huge numbers. Like they're ready to go. They're about to do this thing. And everybody said, no, they're not going to do that. And I was like, geez, I was like, I think it's coming. And then once it happened, and like everybody I was talking to at college, etc., they're all like, oh my God, you were right. Like, that's unbelievable. And then, of course, from there, we watched it take off from there, which was insane how that went. But I get the very odd suspicion that we're sort of coming up to that same point here with the Baltic states at some point or another. It feels like we're coming around to the same type of situation coming up soon. But Enforcer, what do you think?
I'd have to say that it's a very concerning situation, incredibly concerning. I will be honest with y'all. I was one of the people who said before the war in Ukraine started, the Russians would never invade Ukraine. This would be absolutely stupid for them to do something like that. And then they did it, and they proved me wrong entirely. That laid it out pretty plain and simple that anywhere where it looks like the Russians might be trying to gear up for a possible invasion of a country, they probably are possibly gearing up for an invasion of that country, and it should be treated like that. That's the truth. And so that's what I generally have to say about the situation at the moment. It is concerning that they're putting out a story that would allow for them to have a proper defensive justification to invade Estonia over, and that's what's incredibly concerning about this whole thing. And the fact that it's also being put out on Russia 1, which is their state-run television channel, meaning that this got state approval for the story to be spun to the public in Russia. So I hope that does address that the best I can, at least in my opinion, because it is an incredibly concerning issue, without a doubt, and one that we need to respond to.
But you do understand. I will admit, I do understand why people are skeptical about it. Like, obviously, it's something you got to see it to believe it. Like, if Russia does that, I'll be even thinking it might actually happen. I'll still be shocked in some form or another that, oh wow, like Putin actually did that. Like, that would be really crazy to see it in real life. Hopefully, it doesn't happen, and hopefully, my hunch is incorrect because I would hate to see that happen, because that would put the NATO alliance in a do or die scenario at that point, and it could get really, really ugly really quick. So we'll have to find out. But jumping in to our next super chat here. This one goes to Da Vinci Studio Design, who puts in a $100 donation, a very massive support, by the way. And thank you very much, Da Vinci, for that generous support as well. And we do appreciate that very, very much. And he said, love the channel, and I don't watch news on TV, and I listen to guys like you. And I was born in Poland, and I live in the USA. And the question is, from your point of view, how Poland should respond to the Russian drone exploding on their land?
And that is a great question. I also got to say a huge thanks to you for support, Da Vinci Studio Design. As far as Poland's response, it should have been one of militant defense. Poland is not a weak country at all. They are an incredibly strong country. As far as it goes in Europe, they are the strongest ground army in Europe, and they are one of the strongest air forces in Europe next to the United States. Actually, funnily enough, the U.S. has 204 aircraft in Europe at the moment. Most of those actually are combat aircraft, with some supporting aircraft, most of those based out of the Ramstein Air Base in western Germany, near to Kaiserslautern. Well, actually, I think it's Kaiserslautern. Matty, how do you pronounce that right there? Kaiserslautern, I believe. Is that how it's pronounced?
Yeah, you're close enough. Close enough.
Yeah, so that's where most of our strategic airlift and support aircraft are based. There also were some in Britain, but we do have a lot of combat aircraft in the area, and also a lot of support already integrated on the ground, so that way the Air Force can just be flown over, larger parts of it, larger air wings, from the United States, immediately arrive in Europe, and pretty much within the day already start conducting air operations. But as far as Poland goes, Poland has to set up some kind of a militant defensive response to this situation. Russia violated the sovereignty of Polish airspace, flew through their airspace for 1 hour and 70 miles, and blew up near to a village, possibly wounding and killing people. The Polish government should have sent that letter, but should have also attached as an addendum to the letter, in response to this unprovoked provocation by the Russian Federation, Poland will now be forward deploying its armed forces or ground forces to the areas of the Polish-Russian border at Kaliningrad and the Polish-Belarusian border along the eastern region of the country. We will also be setting up a 24/7 air defense perimeter, and if any Russian drones appear to be violating Polish airspace or are violating airspace, they will be subject to being shot down without further warning. That should have been the response by the Polish government. That is making it incredibly clear that they will not allow a provocation like that to happen again. And if anything would even get close to happening like that again, they are going to shoot down that threat before it even coalesces over Polish skies. Meaning, in a sense, that the Ukrainians would be shooting down any drones that even get within several miles of the Ukrainian border if they look like they're on a collision course to cross into Polish airspace. So that generally would be what, in my opinion, the Polish should have done. I'm not asking for the Polish to become, Korn, the god of chaos and war, for, some skulls for the Korn throne or something. I'm just saying that they should have had a lot more militant defensive response to what the Russians did. Not that they need to go on the offensive and take Kaliningrad as a response or anything crazy like that. They should just make it clear, however, we will shoot down any drones that cross into our skies. And not only that, we're going to put everyone on Kaliningrad and Belarus on notice by pretty much forward deploying our armed forces pretty much right up onto the border at this point. So it either forces the Russians...
In my opinion, they should have just done an Article 4 convention, because an Article 4 convention is what's outlined in Article 4, obviously, of the NATO treaty. It requires all the member states to consult with one another whenever any of them believes their territorial integrity, political independence, or their security is threatened. So obviously, if you have a drone flying into a NATO country, which is a very big one, would be Poland, you would naturally want to call an Article 4 conference to at least make it known that it was taken seriously and that there was the possibility, at least, of an Article 5 invocation. Now, Article 4 doesn't guarantee an Article 5 invocation, by the way. That's a very important distinction, but at least it shows the Russians that they are willing to take action. They could have taken action, but we chose not to with our own volition. It's not that we ignored it. We simply chose not to take action.
I would agree, but also I saw someone say in the chat really quickly, actually the Polish military is tied to NATO. That is controlled by the NATO board, non-military leadership, meaning politicians. No, the Polish military is under the direct authority of the Polish government. NATO does not control Poland's army, because if NATO controls Poland's army, that means they control the U.S. army, and from what I last saw, it looks like the president's deploying forces into the Caribbean at the moment on his own command, without NATO saying we can or cannot do that. And also, I haven't seen
the Caribbean.
Oh, well, yeah, into the Caribbean near Venezuela.
Oh, okay, that's what you're talking about. Okay, I get you.
Man, the Caribbean. You said that like that was new, man. You're like, the Caribbean. We're actually covering
something else popped in my mind when you said the Caribbean. I was thinking of like cruise ships and stuff. I was like, the Caribbean. I was like, okay, and that's like, oh, okay, that's down there near Venezuela. I forgot.
Dude, I was like, what? I was like, but beyond that though, this is something that is not the case at all. The Polish military is under control of the Polish government. And that in turn means that the Polish government is the one that tells the Polish military what to do. Now, there might be some voices in NATO, like the United States, that says, don't respond, that would be very bad. And those voices are to be duly noted and ignored. You're supposed to go, thanks for your concern. However, screw you. I'm going to do this because this is my own country and this is in my national defense. And then what in the world does the United States do? Sit there and go, I don't like what Poland did, saying that they were going to defend their people. I'm going to cut off all military support to them. Then you're going to have a giant revolt in Europe because everyone at that point in Europe is going to be like, wait a minute. So you get punished if you act in your national defense, not offensively, just defensively. You get punished. This is stupid. And then that's going to cause the same kind of schism that we saw over Ukraine, but over European defense. So that's what the Polish government should have done. They should have grown some balls, given the letter to the Russians. I'd say the letter was a good move, but also followed with some real action. Because if you're not following with any real action, the letter is just a letter, and it's just, you make me very angry, that sort of a deal. It's not anything that actually shows that you're putting some actions behind your words. That's what I'm looking for. So with that, I hope that does address that the best I can, at least in my opinion. And some people will say this as well, really quickly before I move on to this. Already got to address the detractors because I know it's coming. Someone in the chat's gonna say warmonger. No, like getting to the point of saying, because to those people, really quickly, I got to say this. So when the president deploys the military to go deal with the cartels, that's totally fine. I mean, it's not even really an armed force. It's more like a bunch of criminals just wandering around in some Latin American countries. When we deploy the military to deal with them, oh, it's all justified that they go down there and kick some doors and, blast some folks. But then when it comes to the Russians blowing up a bomb on Polish territory, and it comes to the Polish ability to respond, saying that they should respond in a more aggressive way to deter the Russians from doing something like that again, that's wrong. Like, I don't even get the argument here. That doesn't make any sense. And on top of that, a warmonger would be saying the Polish should take Kaliningrad, not the Polish ought to be militantly in their own defense, and make it incredibly clear that any such infractions like that again will be met with the fullest extent of Poland's armed forces responding. That's what that should be done. Well, that's how it should be done, and that's what I think the Polish government should be doing right now, and it doesn't really appear that they are. But with that, I hope that does address that the best I can, at least in my opinion. And a big thanks to you so much once again for the support, DaVinci Studio Design. And I hope that answered your question well, at least as far as what I think the Polish should have done. And that's why I'm not really happy with them, is for that reason. If they had done what I said to do, which isn't anything extremely aggressive, it's just operating in their own defense and doing it strongly, that would have been great, but they didn't do that. But a huge thanks to you so much once again. Hope that does address that well. And with that, we are on to the last question of this segment, and then we're getting on into the rest of the news.
All right, so our last one before we jump back into the rest of our big news, this one goes to Danny B. And Danny, thank you very much for throwing in that $50 support, by the way, and we do appreciate that. He said, good evening, Enforcers. Chef Danny here, and I'm off early tonight from the restaurant, but now I gotta do work for my company. And also, isn't that the fun of being a business owner, by the way, working 24/7? But he said, now I have to do that. And also, I got a wedding to cater tomorrow, so a long night ahead of me, and I definitely think NATO should step up and do something to Russia.
I would definitely agree with you. I think that NATO needs to stand up and do something towards the Russians. Not go to war with them, I want to make that clear, but definitely stand them down and make it incredibly clear that if they want a war, we'll give them one. I think that's the kind of position that we should be taking. And so I got to thank you for the support, Danny B. And I also got to say, you really do have your plate filled at the moment. No pun intended, because you work in a catering business. Get it, Matthew? Plate filled. But beyond that, I got to thank you so much for being here tonight with us, Danny B. And also throwing in your 2 cents on the matter, because my 2 cents is that I would agree with you. They need to respond in some sort of a greater form than what we're doing right now. We got to have some balls. Like, that's what people are not getting. It's just absolutely crazy. But still, beyond that, I got to thank you greatly once again. I hope that you have a great time catering tomorrow, though. And also, I got to say, the grind is real. I would completely understand on that end. The grind is insanely real. So a huge thanks to you so much once again. I hope that does address that well. And with that, we are going to be moving on into the rest of the news. Also, by the way, there's some guy in the chat. I see some people responding to him. They're like, wow, this guy is silly. And I'll have to weigh in. This guy is silly. This guy is sitting in here saying anything that involves even armed defense of a country is ridiculous. Like, this is like the greatest pacifist I've ever seen.
Oh, come on, man. That's that guy right there is not even worth addressing, man. That argument's so
but
weak that's an argument that shouldn't even be made right there.
But I'm looking at it, man, and I'm like, oh my God. I'm like, that is like one of the most brain dead arguments I've ever seen. ever. Like, I just have to point it out. Like, that might win the award for the night for the worst argument ever made in the chat is that one. But anyways, moving on from that and on into the rest of the news for the night, we did get to hear outside of Europe for a moment and in the Democratic People's Republic of Korea that the reason why the South Koreans fired the 10 warning shots at the North Koreans is because a group of 30 of them, quite literally a platoon-sized element of North Koreans, crossed the border. And that's what triggered the warning shots. That was according
Why
to
is South Korea keeping that so secret, by the way? Like, South Korea is, like, really withholding this information until the last second here. North Korea finally admitted they got shot at by the South Koreans, and now South Korea is coming out and admitting that 30 people tried to run across the border. 30 soldiers, that is. That seems like a pretty big move by North Korea.
I mean, that's absolutely ridiculous. It was a freaking platoon. It's like, and the North Koreans are angry. Oh, you shot at our platoon that was crossing the border. It's like,
How
of course
dare
they
you.
did. Of course they did. It was a freaking platoon. It's huge. That's literally like a classroom of people walking across the border. That's nuts. Of course they're going to shoot at them. So that was what caused the provocation that the North Koreans responded to yesterday officially, was that they sent 30 guys across the border. Such a stupid move by them, and obviously they're going to get shot at. That would make sense. Anyways, the North Koreans also tested a new air defense missile system today, from what we were able to hear, according to the KCNA, was the Korean Central News Agency in North Korea, and we also got to see a montage of pictures of the system in use. They shrouded the system with some twigs. I don't know what it is, actually. It could be any system. I'm guessing it's probably a Russian-provided S-300 or S-350 or S-400 air defense system that's being operated here. But we could see the fat man talking to all of the skinny generals, except for this one. This one seems somewhat plump. He must be the favored one of the group. And this guy's also staring straight at his belly. He's like, God dang, this guy's eating. But beyond that...
That's the status symbol in North Korea. It's not, you're not judged by your status like you are in America, like unless you have a Lamborghini or something like that. Over there, it's if you're fat, like, oh, he must be rich, man. He is rolling in the money. That's what that guy over there is thinking. Maybe one day he'll reach his pay grade right there of an officer.
You know, actually, Matthew, when you're looking at this picture up here, it doesn't really look like anyone, including the fat man, is listening to this guy. It looks like everyone's looking at him in curiosity as to how he got fat.
Yeah, they might be accusing him of maybe corruption later on. There's no telling. Kim's thinking, let's see here. Is it going to be the missile in the square this time, or is it going to be dunking? Let's see which one's it going to be.
Kim Jong-un's sitting there. He's like, I thought I made it being fat for everyone in the country but me illegal. Like, that's how he's looking at him. He's like...
He said, so that's where those spare Twinkies went.
Bro, and every general isn't even looking at his face. They're looking down at his stomach like, what the hell? This guy's on the phone. He's calling the internal security services to have this guy shot tomorrow. Like, he's been eating food that has not been given to him. But beyond that, the air defense test was successful, apparently, from what they showed on Korean state TV. So it looks like they may have a new operational surface-to-air missile defense system. We don't really know what type it is or what its capabilities are for that matter. So... interesting to know. Outside of that, the Russians in Primorsky Krai Oblast, directly across the North Korean border, are getting the North Korean treatment because fuel shortages are getting worse. Here's everyone in line for gas.
All gas, or all brakes. No gas right here. Honestly, this sucks. And also, you still have to get a coupon to get gas, by the way. So you apparently have to go to the local government office to get your gas coupon just to get in line and wait all day long to get one tank of gas, if that's what they let you get. I'm not even sure if they let you get a full tank.
Man, it's absolutely crazy, man. Look at them. Lined up forever.
Look at these cars, by the way. Let's see. I'm seeing, was that a Chrysler? Like, these are actually somewhat American-looking vehicles, actually. Like, go back for a second. I want to see that lineup again. That was some American vehicles in that lineup.
Let's see here. Let's take a look back.
I think I see a Toyota. That's obviously not American, but Toyota back there. Looks like maybe a Honda. Well, I saw a Honda maybe. Let's see here. I think another Honda.
Is that a Honda Civic right here?
No, that's a Prius right there, I think.
Oh, could it?
Minivans, those are not Russian. Yeah, it's actually kind of an interesting lineup of vehicles there.
And then there's the lone one right here, under the lamp.
Also kind of dumb, if you're having a gas shortage, why are you going to sit there idling your car and burning gas while you wait to get gas? It's kind of stupid.
Matthew, we don't ask those questions here in Russia. Like, nothing's supposed to make sense. But we also got to see some more clips here.
И сейчас громкоговоритель сказали, топливо заканчивается, не стойте в очереди. Просто представляете, вся та очередь.
Man, you know those people with those Land Cruisers, they're hurting and crying right now.
No! Someone just made an announcement over the intercom. Stop drinking the gasoline. It's not vodka. But anyways. This person's looking out the window like it's the apocalypse, dude. What the hell?
Yeah, really. It's like, it must be a bad neighborhood or something. He won't even walk out the door.
Bro, he's scared someone's gonna stab him and steal his like quart of oil that he's got in his hand. But moving on out of that, the gas shortage is getting really bad because now they're actually starting to run out of gas at sporadic gas stations all throughout the country, with octane levels 92 and 95, the most common types in the Russian Federation, running out entirely. And this isn't even in an area of occupied Ukraine, Crimea, Primorsky Krai, or any other of the periphery regions like West Abkhazia. This is actually in central Russia, somewhere near to the Ryazan Oblast, meaning that some gas stations are already losing most of their supply of fuel sporadically throughout the country, meaning that the supplies are completely strained at this moment and are on the very verge of collapse right now. We also got to see further on down, near to the area of the Novoshitinsk refinery, that refinery is still on fire.
Oh, and it spreaded.
Yeah. There. Also, as a side note, the gas stations around the refinery are now also out of gas as well. Right there. Actually, that's this. Hold up. That's the same picture as the one that was supposedly from. Oh, wait a minute. Hang on. Let me check something here really quickly. Huh. Interesting. So this is either from Novoshitinsk or the Ryazan Oblast, because that's what I had heard earlier in the day, is that Ryazan was starting to have sporadic outages, but then someone said that was from Novoshitinsk. So now I'm going to have to do some more research on that off air and find out where that gas station was. Was it Novoshitinsk? Or was it up near Ryazan? I have no clue. But anyways, beyond that, we also
I kind of find it funny that gas station was called F1, like Formula One. The sad part is Russia doesn't even race Formula One, so it's like, you know, they're the one country that really doesn't get involved with that, because I think they're one of their contracts got canceled for a Grand Prix inside of Russia. Actually, for I'm not sure if it was F1 or maybe a race similar to that. Like Russia's just not in the racing game anymore.
Huh, that's wild. I actually didn't hear about that. I know that they're not in the Olympics because they have this thing, kind of like F1 cars, you know how they like the good juice? Apparently, Olympic athletes from Russia like the good juice as well, so they generally aren't allowed in the Olympics anymore.
Huh, interesting.
You know, like steroids and stuff like that's what I'm trying to say. But moving on from that and on up into the area of Unecha, we also got to see the damage at the Unecha pumping station. Ooh, that's a lot of damage. And there it is in high definition. That is a lot of damage. You can actually see that some of the main pumping buildings actually were completely destroyed in the hit. So the Unecha pumping station may be out for some time. We also were able to hear, outside of that the Ukrainians were conducting another large-scale attack against the Russian Federation. You can actually see all of the attack paths and corridors of the drones right there. And we also were able to hear the proof of that as the air raids were happening on Belgorod.
Сейчас, наверное, сбьют, Оксан.
Oh.
Вон он полетел. Ты видишь, куда?
Hey, it's the dodo bird. It's finally back.
Прямо на город
Bro, that's like
полетел.
that tropical bird that you hear like when you crash in the Amazon or something, bro.
It really does. That did not sound like a bird native to Russia. But I'm no bird expert, though.
Dude, that's one of those CIA birds, man. Like it's anyways.
It's a toucan.
Toucan. But we can see the fire over in the distance. And take a look at this. Oh, well, another little fire.
It all harkens back to Chernobyl.
It all kind of does.
Not great, not terrible. Same thing here. No radiation, but still all the same pain.
You know what? Speaking of radiation, Matthew, I guess we're going to skip ahead really quickly and cover this one. There was a fire today that actually happened at the Kursk Nuclear Power Plant near Kurchatov, which is why I almost said Kerch. There was a fire that broke out here at the grounds of this power plant. And at least at first, we did not know what the fire was. We still kind of don't know what the fire is, but we did get to hear later from Russian authorities. They said, don't worry, everyone. Fire, no big deal. Only transformer. Nothing big. Which makes me think it might actually be something big, because the Russians don't really tell the truth a lot on anything, and the fact that they came out and said it was a power transformer and not a part of the plant, that's a little interesting. But nevertheless, there was a fire out there at the Kursk Nuclear Power Plant today. We don't know what it was on. We just know that one happened. The Russians are saying it was a power transformer, but we really don't take their word for much of anything, and shouldn't. So there was a fire there, and there's not much more known at the moment than that. We were also able to hear, however, that the Russians, because of this drone attack, had to conduct some restrictions of the flights coming in and out of the wonderful city of Volgograd, and also had to cut down on the flights coming into the city of St. Petersburg. 100 flights actually ended up being canceled at St. Petersburg today at the, I think it's the, let me make sure to check this here, the Pulkovo airport. I was about to say the Pushkin airport, but that's down near Moscow. And we also got to see the drones flying over St. Petersburg as well. Take a little look.
Не надо, долбоёб, блядь.
Denada.
Да. Пиздец, блядь.
Походу дела. О-о-о-о-о.
That's
Bro,
not
this guy's
bad,
about to
man.
make this guy's about to make a track, bro. He said that and said, "This thing got me like, oh, like, bro."
Пиздец.
I'm not gonna lie.
блядь.
Like whenever you watch those, like whenever you watch those like tsunami videos or something, when like Japanese people are watching tsunamis come in, they make literally the exact same sounds this guy's making right here. They're like, oh, it's like it's literally the same thing.
Interesting.
Вау, сука.
Oh damn! Look at Suka, Bliad.
Все слышали?
Well, that's the end of that clip, but it appears the flights were canceled for that reason. Anyways, folks, a lot of people have been talking about this whole thing about the emergency meeting that was held of oil companies to address the fuel crisis in Russia today. What was going on with that? Matthew, what are people thinking about that? And what are you thinking about that as well?
All right, so the Russian officials did call an emergency meeting. They actually called it last night, and I think they had it today. And it happened to be on the 99th floor of a building that they had this meeting. Also, that's sarcasm, by the way. But they met today to address the fuel crisis, and they're meeting all the Russian oil execs in one big room to let them know that the Russian government has them in their sights. In their thoughts and prayers. What happens, though, from this point forward? 62% said Putin is going to probably start eliminating the oil executives to shift the blame, while 19% said Russian oil probably will fix the issue with help externally, and 6% said it seems like it might stabilize in the temporary means. And I have a feeling that this is not going to stabilize, because unless Russia can so rapidly get help from even India, which that would have to be like record speed to get some help from India, I doubt this is going to stabilize in the short term. It may stabilize in the long term, but not in the short term, though, because you got to remember, the Russian military takes up a ton of gasoline. Running all these tanks and all that equipment takes a lot, and they need to prioritize that. So the civilians are going to be the last people to get gasoline, and that's going to create a humanitarian issue across Russia, which is rapidly spreading still. So I think Putin is going to fix the issue by bringing those gentlemen back up to the 99th floor for another meeting, and he may have them stay there for a little longer on the 99th floor, and maybe might have them leave the 99th floor, but not take the elevator. But Enforcer, what say you?
I'd have to say, I think some oil executives might start going the way of the dodo, you know what I mean? Like, dodos didn't fall from great heights, but sometimes some birds do, you know? It happens to come with the territory of flying at high altitudes. But I'd have to say that those Russian oil executives don't have wings, but they'll be flying for a small time from the 99th floor down to the ground. But in the meantime, though, it does appear that the situation is really bad. It's getting worse. And also, really quickly, Anton Gerashenko on Twitter actually made a whole post today pointing out every single economic sector that the Russians are plummeting in. I'm not going to read this whole thing, but we do have a link to this in the description below the stream. It is a lot, but it was very well researched, and it pretty much summarizes and amalgamates all the information that we've been covering here on this channel for months, all in one post about what's been going on economically in Russia recently. And the picture is incredibly bleak. Everything is going terribly. So it does appear that the Russians are suffering from some pretty bad economic offsets, or more so, steps in the wrong direction. But it's okay, everyone, because the Russians will always they'll always pull through in the end, right? Right? No, it's not true. Beyond that, however, we also were able to hear that the power went off on Gotland Island today for quite some while. The power was just restored before we went on air, but the power was out for a significant amount of hours of time, along with apparently phone communication as well, and some possible water issues on the island as well. We do not know why this happened, but it's being believed that that may have been an attempt by the Russians at sabotage. Well, actually, by the Swedes, as a act of sabotage possibly conducted by the Russians. We also got to hear that the Russians are still building their mega antenna in the area of Kaliningrad, which we can see the satellites of right here. And we also were able to hear in Belarus, moving us down to the Middle East for a brief moment, that apparently the Belarusians are being asked by the Iranians for help, as the Iranian president was just recently visited Belarus, asked Lukashenko for help in rebuilding Iran's air defense network, clearly showing they still got a long way to go with trying to get that thing back up and running. In the meantime, in Iran, we were able to hear that the Iranians are making an interesting sort of a deal out of this thing. I had to show this, Matthew, because this was something else.
Yeah, it was something for sure.
So in the Mehrabad International Airport in Tehran, Iran, they have cardboard cutouts of not the most influential people in their Islamic revolution, but all the ones that died, at least like within just the last year alone. This right here is actually Ricey, who y'all may remember face planted into a mountain in the back of a helicopter about a year ago. I also include maybe like a couple of seconds of the music because it is sublime, maybe a masterpiece even, probably some of the greatest. I'll not be muting that. So we can see here the cardboard cutouts. Y'all ought to hear it when it really crescendos later on in the song. It's rough.
Honestly, kind of creepy, actually. Like, this is the creepiest thing I've seen in a while. And also, I mean, I'm just saying, it's not like Iran's rich or something. They really don't have the money to do anything crazy, but cardboard cutouts, like it's some type of like cheap, like Disneyland attraction or something. I mean, this just seems weird to me. And also, I don't even know who half these guys are in here. Like, obviously, there's some familiar faces they're about to show here in a second. Also, nothing like showing the kids this mess. This is really good to expose the kids to. But, like, look at this. There's a guy in a suit. You know, he was just a nice fellow the whole time. He was just a businessman. I'll go back to the very beginning, though. I think I saw Bagheeri up there at some point. I think he was in the front.
Let's see here. Let's see where he is.
Let's see. Isn't that Bagheeri right back there, like in the middle?
Yeah, that is him right there. Yeah,
that is
him.
Bagheeri. You remember him? That was the guy that was in the little janky little control room when he was launching the last attack on Israel. That didn't work out.
Yeah, that didn't really turn out too well. I totally forgot who this guy was. Like, the other guy over here on the far right, I believe that was Ricey. I don't know who this guy is, though, in the middle.
Are you sure that's not the Hezbollah leader, Nasrallah?
No, Nasrallah.
This is Ricey right here, I think.
Let me go pull up Nasrallah, who got hit in the Nasrallah. Oh, you're right. That is, oh my goodness. That is Nasrallah over there, who got hit in the Nasrallah. That's him. So then this is Ricey. Okay, there we go. And then
honestly, like these
Soleimani!
guys right here.
Soleimani!
Yeah. You don't want him nearby. That's the curse of Soleimani right there. Anybody that guy came across seems to meet a bad fate. Although it just happens to be if you're in the Iranian government, you kind of meet a bad fate these days, it seems like. But this is a hell of a retirement hall of fame here. Like I've heard of like retirement parties for, you know, people leaving the company and leaving the employment and things like that. But this is like a whole new level here. These gentlemen retired forever.
Man, this guy, I don't even know who the hell he is. He's like at the forefront, like he was an important guy. I don't even know who he is. Like
he was customer service. Great guy, great associate.
You can tell by the smile. He definitely gave out a lot of refunds. They just walk past his second row, and just move on to this guy. I don't even know who that is.
He was the bagger.
Also, we have this guy here holding his hand over his heart. I don't know why. Isn't that kind of like an American thing to do? Also, this guy, he was just like, he was the Domino's delivery man. They just put him in because he's pretty chill like that.
A front door greeter.
We also have this guy. That's Obi-Wan Kenobi from the original Star Wars movies. They just slipped him in for a
Stalker,
sneaky.
you know, those stalkers, I tell you, they always just dress so casual and stuff. The stalkers just show up and do whatever the hell they want, but the cabinets stay full. They keep the shelves stocked. But look at this guy back here, janitorial duty back here. Got to rep those janitors, I tell you. I don't even really know. Like, this is the cheapest thing, like so cheap, and also nothing like coming to the airport and seeing all the martyrs. Like, time you get off the plane, like that seems like a bad message to send.
Yeah, the martyrs of the Islamic Revolution relegated to cardboard cutouts. Like, it's like that's a rough one. But moving on from that and on out of the Islamic Republic of Iran, we also did get to hear that the Israelis are continuing their offensive through Gaza City, and we were able to get some clips of that. This one is not loading, so we will go to the next one. Hopefully, this one will load. We also were able to see additional clips of the airstrikes being conducted by the Israelis within central Gaza as their offensive is continuing, which we can see right here.
Wow.
Pretty wild. Once again, the 2,000-pound bombs being pulled out.
Oh, that density. That's some very dense areas there.
Yeah, pretty population dense. But nevertheless, it does appear that the Israeli offensive in the Gaza Strip is continuing at the moment as they're trying to clear out the last remnants of Hamas, according to the Israeli claim, and appear to be working towards that at the moment. Moving on out of the Middle East, however, and back on into Europe, or more so into the United States for a brief moment, just to cover some periphery news over here, we were able to hear that the United States has approved the sale of 3,350 extended-range missiles to Ukraine, which should be available within the next 6 weeks. We also were able to hear that apparently the United States of America has been limiting Ukraine's use of missiles for long-range strikes into Russia for months, meaning that the United States is putting a imposition on the Ukrainians' use of their own Flamingo cruise missiles. We also were able to hear in the meantime that Guyana, a country that's under a military occupation to some extent from Venezuela, has openly stated that if the United States conducts military intervention against Venezuela, they will support the action. So it does appear that they're trying to position themselves to see the United States conduct a military action against Venezuela. But still, it does appear that there are some interesting developments in America. Now, moving on back into Europe, it's time for us to get on into that frontline news in Ukraine. But before we get into that, a lot of people have been talking about the power outage that occurred at Gotland Island. And Matthew, what are people thinking about that? And what are you thinking about that as well?
All right. So the issue on Gotland Island, excuse me, is Sweden's island, by the way. It's called Gotland Island. They suffered a full power, internet, and cellular blackout, according to some reports I saw. So it was not just the power. It was apparently the internet as well, and also cellular in a large part of the country, at least according to what we heard. So what are your thoughts about that pretty large full-scale blackout across many different sectors? So 64% said it sounds like covert Russian aggression, while 17% said it sounds unusual to me, and 11% said it sounds like a routine outage. And Gotland does experience outages more frequently than other places, I will say that. But to have a full spectrum outage across the power, internet, and possibly cellular as well, that is unusual. That is very unusual, actually. And it turns out that Gotland, being in the middle of the Baltic Sea, happens to be an area where Russia has a very strong interest. So Gotland would be a target of Russian aggression. And Russia has been caught dragging anchor with their Shadow Fleet vessels through that area, cutting cables. So it sounds like it was a cut power cable that led to it. So I would say it's most likely covert Russian aggression. Right now, Sweden's being very evasive about what caused it, and they're claiming they're still investigating, but I have a feeling they probably know exactly what happened. But I'm with the 64%. And Enforcer, what say you?
I had to say that I'm with the 64% as well. It does sound like covert Russian aggression. I would have most likely assumed that another anchor-dragging Russian ship passed in between Sweden and the Gotland Island and severed most of the cables that were providing the power as well as other systems to Gotland Island, and that was most likely what created the incident today. So with that, I hope that does address it the best I can. And moving on to the Ukrainian front lines, we have more to cover. Moving on down into the area of the Sumy Oblast, we were able to see some recon elements of the Kraken Special Operations Forces in the area of Sumy. We'll have to mute it for copyright reasons. I was getting to that, Matthew. I was getting to that. You were like, music.
I was making sure.
Oh. We can see them riding ATVs through the woods. That actually looks fun. just riding around on the rover. Call them Ed Sharpova. You now see them getting down into a small little bunker that they've created. All of this in the name of reconnaissance.
Notice the metaphor here, the black and white footage. At this point, the Ukrainians are so fed up with war, they see things in black and white at this point. It's as straightforward as they can get. There's no confusion with them. They see it right in front of them. They see it so clearly. They have 20/20 vision, they say. They see the Russians for what they are. It's a travesty. It's a shame. What jerks.
What jerks? Absolutely ridiculous. And we can see them continuing to move through the underbrush. Very carefully now.
Someone said, is this a CIA propaganda channel? No. Do you see the word CIA in the channel
Matthew,
title? No.
He's uncovered the deep state. We have to pack up and move now.
Oh man, I tell you what, they call me in my free time. They used to call me in high school Deep State Matt. That's what they used to call me the whole time. I was like, no, I'm never beating the allegations. I tell you what, I'm Deep State Matt. I'll tell you what.
Man, I remember one time, man, I was hanging out with some friends, and they started to suspect that I was a part of the deep state, like I am. And they sat there and said, what does everyone want to eat? I said, a pizza. They said, deep dish? And I was like, damn it, they figured it out. They figured it out. That's the code word. We're out of here. We got to pack up and move now. Damn it. A random person on YouTube commented on our stuff and said we might be deep state or CIA. It's over, folks. They've foiled the plot. It's all over for us here. We have nothing left. But you see them still continuing their reconnaissance, also laying down fire on the Russians. This is what they call reconnaissance by fire to some extent. You know, like Jake from State Farm has a ring to it, but Matt from the NSA doesn't.
Yeah, Matt, I don't like that. I don't like that at all. If I was from there, I wouldn't say it like that anyway.
I mean, exactly. It wouldn't make any sense. But anyways, moving on from that, now of the area of the Sumy region, and moving further on down the line, we also got to see the Russian casualty report for the day, which was pretty decent. Take a look at it. No Bobcats, but Miss Easy Keeper of the Records did state that troop losses last 7 days are all below 1,000, which hasn't happened since April of 2024. They few tanks, APCs, with a good measure of vehicles and drones every day. And we were able to see that 840 Russian soldiers have been wounded and killed over the past 24 hours, along with 4 APCs, 86 supply trucks, 5 main battle tanks, 23 artillery pieces, 148 drones, and that was it. Still a pretty decent day, but not one of the greatest or largest that we have seen so far. Moving on from that and down towards the area of the Seberansky forest, we were able to hear the Ukrainian counteroffensive efforts were able to retake a village, Novomikhailivka, near the Lyman area. It does appear that the Ukrainian armed forces are continuing to push the Russians back in most areas, and are also getting a larger amount of breakthroughs as the Russians are running out of fuel. We also got to see that the 63rd Brigade was also blasting some Russians today near to the area of the Seberansky forest. Here's the Ukrainian tank, there are the Russians, and the Russians lined them up, and the Ukrainians are going to knock them down. And the Ukrainians are absolutely knocking them down. High explosive shells right through the window.
That's never a good thing. I don't think insurance covers high explosive shells through the window. I think that's probably somewhere in the policy in the fine print. They probably don't cover that. So you might want to make sure you have the extra rider added onto your policy for that.
Probably most likely so, I'd have to say. Also in the Seversk area, we also got to see the 20th of the K2 hitting the Russian forces.
And guess what, folks? Even if you have that added on, they're still going to deny it.
Because insurance isn't there to provide you with real coverage. It's there for you to pay every month because it's against the law to not have insurance.
They really said it right. You remember when you used to watch that movie, The Incredibles, when you were young, or at least in our generation when we were young, you used to watch The Incredibles. It was like a Pixar movie. They had Mr. Incredible working in the insurance office, and
For
they had the little
Insuracare.
fella come around the corner talking about why are you accepting their claims? I didn't understand that as a kid, but as I've gotten older, I'm like, oh damn, that's really the way it works. They were trying to warn the kids about the insurance companies. They weren't just like making a funny movie.
We're not here to help out the customers, Bob. We're here to help out the shareholders. Like, man, I was like, bruh.
Facts, honestly.
I did not realize what that meant when I was a kid. And now listening back to it, I was like, my God, that was so realistic. It was sad how realistic that was. Oh, look at that. The top blew off. I guess that house was the one designed with the top falling off.
Wow, they really did that just like a Michael Bay film.
Man, it was actually pretty impressive, really. But moving on from that and past the Pokrovsk front, as we've already covered the breakthrough there, we also got to hear that a village was also retaken by the Ukrainian armed forces at the Zeleny High direction in the Donetsk region, and we were able to see a little footage of it. No music! Whoa! Well, pop a little grenade in and let her rip. See how these guys didn't have, like, the doors get blown off right in front of them and the wall ripped through from the grenade because they weren't North Koreans? Notice the difference. Ukrainians, they ain't playing. Well, that's the end of that clip right there. But still, great to see the Ukrainians have been pushing the Russians back pretty much across the entire front today. Moving on from that and on down into the area of the Dnipro, the estuary, we did get to see the Barracuda conducting intakes on the Russians with a little addition to their boat. Have y'all ever seen a boat that has a additional attachment to it like this? It's got rocket launchers on it. And it's designed to just drive up to someone on shore and start blasting with rocket launchers. That's kind of crazy, isn't it? Well, take a look.
You won't find that at Bass Pro.
I don't think you would.
Oh, that is sleek though. They added like a whole like custom cover to it and everything. That is sleek right there. I mean, they're like points for design.
Bruh, this thing is sick.
That's like one of those fine Italian super yachts.
So here they go down the way with it. And now they're about to show y'all what it can do. And there's the rocket launchers. And they just start popping off rockets at them. Crazy stuff, right? It's like war on TV over here. And it's sick. It looks so good. But anyways, that's the Barracuda. They're now using that in the Dnipro River area down near Kherson to be able to combat the Russian forces near to the Kinburn Spit. But with that in mind, folks, we have actually gone east to west, north to south in every single way and have covered every single piece of news for the day. And there is no speech from President Volodymyr Zelensky once again for us to have a halftime show. I think he's just completely given up on making those at this point. So with that, it is time for us to move on into the second segment of this stream where we get to talk to all of y'all. And this is the segment that is one of the most fun. We get to talk about literally anything and everything. Anything and everything except for politics, religion, climate change, or if the A-10 is relevant in modern warfare. Those are 4 topics that are just not available, not accessible, or as they say in North Korea, not permitted. And so we will be getting on into the rest.
Now, are you sure Zelensky didn't have a speech? Because today, I believe, wasn't today National Flag Day in Kyiv? I think he had a speech for that.
Not on his website, at least. Like, unless they stop uploading them to the websites. Like, I'll show y'all just for proof here, really quickly. Yeah, the last one that they have on the website is from the 21st of August, and the one before that was from the 15th.
Interesting. So, let's see here. I've reposted this. I'm not sure if we can show this one or not, but it is him speaking today. It looks like on a speech.
1 second. I'm actually going to go check something. Nope, I don't want that. Let's see. 1 second. I'm going to check something out really quickly. I don't know why YouTube just did this, Matthew. I just pulled up. Oh, wait a minute. Hold up. Hold up, folks. No freaking way. He's been having speeches every day. They're just not uploading him to his website anymore. It's just on the YouTube channel.
Oh, my God.
What the hell? What the hell? So just to explain to you all how this works, I always go to the official website of the president of Ukraine because I know it's copyright free. So when I don't see one there, we just don't run one. Apparently, they're just uploading them to the president of Ukraine's YouTube channel right here, and they're not uploading them to anywhere else. So we're gonna get. Oh, wait a minute! It's the one with the translator. Do we have one without the translator that we can get?
I don't know. I'm not really sure.
Doesn't look like we can. It looks like this is the only one that they uploaded to his website. So, with that in mind, folks, we're going to play this so that way we do have ourselves a little bit of a halftime show. And also, it was Ukrainian Flag Day, which is a pretty big thing inside of Ukraine. So let me go and get the translation in English in the subtitles. And without further ado, here is the speech from President Volodymyr Zelensky here on day 1277 of the war. So, here is the speech.
Speech!
Шановні пані та панове, президент України, Верховний головнокомандувач Збройних сил України Володимир Зеленський.
Порт! Для зустрічі ліворуч!
This is like a WWE walkout.
Чист!
Honestly, I'm here to kick ass.
Пане президенте України, Верховного командувача Збройних сил України, почесна варта з нагоди Дня Державного прапору України вишиковано. Начальник почесної варти, старший лейтенант Косюга.
Слава Україні!
Ну-ну! Ги!
Шановні наші воїни, всі українці, українки. Сьогодні важливий день, день однієї з наших найбільш сильних емоцій, відчуття, яке буває, коли ти вдома, або коли ти впізнаєш своїх і своє, і де б ти у світі не був, в яку б країну ти не приїхав, коли помічаєш український прапор, розумієш, що поруч з тобою, може, і незнайомі тобі особисто люди, але це точно знайомі серця. Кожен з нас протягом життя тисячі разів бачить синьо-жовтий прапор, і це вже так поширено у нас, коли йдеш вулицями наших міст, будь-якої нашої громади, завжди десь обов'язково зустрічаєш наш державний прапор. На будівлях, на флагштоках, під склом машин чи у когось на наплічнику. І це дуже важливо для людей. Саме так позначити свою любов до України. Але коли ти постійно серед наших символів, іноді, можливо, перестаєш сприймати їх як щось дійсно особливе. Хоча це, насправді, завжди щось особливе. Саме цей прапор – це відчуття спасіння для людей, яких ми повертаємо з російського полону. Коли вони бачать українські кольори, вони розуміють зло, минуло. І цей прапор – це мета і мрія для багатьох наших людей на тимчасово окупованих територіях України. Вони бережуть цей прапор. Вони бережуть його, бо знають, ми свою землю не подаруємо окупанту. Цей прапор символізує найдорожче для сотень тисяч наших воїнів, чоловіків, жінок з усієї нашої України, які захищають не лише той чи інший окремий напрямок, не тільки Вовчанськ чи Добропілля, а всю нашу Україну. і, ризикуючи своїм життям, виборюють право на життя для всієї нашої держави. І немає такої столиці у світі, де б поважали життя і водночас не поважали б наш український прапор. Всюди, де життя є, справді цінністю, партнерство з Україною стає цінністю. Україна об'єднує найкращих і вже зробила спільною думкою багатьох, що тільки разом з Україною може бути досягнута гарантована безпека для демократичних націй. І хай кожен, хто зробив свій власний внесок у таку силу українських кольорів, сьогодні почує ці слова. І це слова, передусім слова вдячності. Це абсолютно заслужено. Я хочу подякувати сьогодні всім, кожній, хто бореться заради нашої держави і людей. Ми дякуємо всім, хто працює в інтересах України і нашої з вами незалежності. Я дякую кожному, хто свою особисту силу додає до сили української нації. І обов'язково пам'ятаємо наших героїв різних часів, які з нашим українським прапором в руках, на шевронах, чи просто в серці билися заради нас, заради України, боролися за її власну волю та, на жаль, загинули в боях. Ми пам'ятаємо їх та не прощаємо ворогу наших втрат. Прошу зараз шанувати хвилиною мовчання пам'ять усіх наших полеглих героїв. Дякую. Хай живе Україна, хай завжди гордим буде наш синьо-жовтий прапор. З Днем прапора, шановні українці, слава Україні!
Героям слава!
Героям слава!
На державний прапор України! Румкує! Бою! Честь!
Державний прапор України піднято.
Руч!
Згідно з Конституцією України, державними символами України є державний прапор України, державний герб України і державний гімн України. Державний прапор України стяг із двох рівновеликих горизонтальних смуг синього і жовтого кольорів. Стяг, під яким творилася і твориться новітня історія нашої країни – сильної, незламної, незалежної. Стяг, під яким наші воїни героїчно боронять рідну землю від російської навали. І під яким ми неодмінно відсвяткуємо нашу перемогу.
До урочистого марш! Нап! Чи! Звільнянням праворуч! Кроком! Руш!
I'm just saying, man, this lady over there on the right with that staring right there is getting me like messed up. This lady right here looks like she could be MMA or something. Like, I'll tell you what, god dang.
Oh, man. Dude, I'm not gonna lie, man. That woman was a part of a hit
Урочистості з
squad at
нагоди
some
Дня
point.
державного прапора завершено. Зі святом, Україно!
But that's the end of the clip, and that is the end of the speech from President Volodymyr Zelensky, and also the celebration of National Flag Day. But that is going to be moving us on to the second part of this stream, where we get to talk to each and every one of y'all, and hopefully none of y'all will have nightmares about the scary translator lady that was on the right side of the screen that appeared to be staring into all of her souls simultaneously and crushing them at the same time. It really begs the question, if Ukraine has a woman that looks that fiery in her eye, why didn't they send her to the Russian Federation to just end the war immediately? I have a feeling that she could just probably end it by staring at Putin for about 5 minutes. But nevertheless, it is time for us to move on into that second question segment where we get to talk to each and every single one of y'all. And boy, howdy, what a fun question segment it is. We get to have great deals of state-mandated fun, getting to talk about all the kinds of things that have been approved by the state government for us to be able to speak of, including those matters that do not pertain to religion, politics, or climate change, or whether the A-10 is relevant on the modern battlefield. Nevertheless, we will be getting into that question segment at this very moment. And so, Matthew, please take it away.
I'll tell you what, it's every single time. I don't know why. The simping is outrageous, like in the chat.
Unreal.
I mean, the simping is crazy. Unreal simping, I'm not going to lie. But anyways, moving on from that. Also, by the way, she looks like she could actually like be an MMA fighter or something like that, so I'll be careful. But anyways, jumping into our first super chats here, because we're fresh out of poll questions, we're jumping right into those right now. And our first one goes to Marion Deemer. And Marion puts in a $30 donation, and thank you very much, Marion, as well, for that $30 support.
Dang! Bro,
Bam,
21
son.
gun salute on National Flag Day. Hold on. Whoa! Like,
Man, I'll tell you what, don't make me bring out that cowbell now. Bink, bink. But anyways, thank you very much, Marion, for that $30 support. And we appreciate that very much, by the way. And sadly, there is no comment to address. But Enforcer, what say you?
I got to thank you massively for the support, Marion Deemer. You had no comment to address, but we know that you have nothing but kind things to say. And I got to thank you massively for enjoying this channel and helping it to keep on running. Because folks like you helped make this thing possible. And also, really quickly, folks, before we move on, speaking that we have a moment, I did see some people voicing complaints about the force disposition map earlier in the night, that it is difficult to read because of the color of the map. Now, I do want to get some input on this because I'm trying to make this map as pleasing to the eye as possible and also as easy to read as possible. At least for folks who may know a little bit about how the armed forces work and also how it'll work in the future, because the deep state map is very similar to a degree, but this is an attempt to make one that's a little bit more encompassing, and also the unit identifiers are a little bit more detailed. So, do y'all like this color? There are other options that we've been looking at, and really quickly to show a couple of those to y'all, this is the number one. We think it looks pretty cool. It looks very militaristic and also really clean. It snaps, but there are a couple of others. We have this one, which is also an option. Although this one, you know, like it's a give or take kind of a thing. Like we're not really sure if this would be too good to have long term, or we have this one, which is pretty much our normal map, but with the terrain features present on it instead. This is the normal map that we use for our news reporting purposes on the main map, but generally we have 3 other versions. We have this one, which is a terrain map. We have this one, which is an orange-blue scale, and then we also have this one, which is, hold up. This one, which is the dark blue scale map. So
I've
generally,
seen a lot of people tonight. A lot of people complain they really can't see this blue version of it right here. Their eyes can't adjust to it. I've seen like probably about 10 people say that tonight.
yeah, I've seen a decent amount of people saying that. So, really quickly, I'll lay out our options for all of y'all to say in the chat: dark blue, orange, or normal with terrain, or just normal.
I think normal with terrain looks the best, to be honest. It's easier on my eyes too, just looking at this version.
Man, honestly though, this just goes so hard. I mean, it makes it a little bit harder to read, but it is really cool looking. But I do see a lot of people saying that the normal version would probably be a little bit easier. Actually, Matthew, let's run a poll on that in the meantime. Ask folks, what do you like better for the map color? And I want to make it really clear once again while he's making the poll. We have 3 options because some others are just absolutely hideous, like this one or this one. So it's either dark blue, which is this one, or we have this one, which is orange, or we have this one, which is generally normal. So, normal colored map, orange, or dark blue. Those are the options. And whatever ends up getting the highest result on the poll, that's what will change the force disposition map to be permanently. Because I want to make it as readable as possible for everyone, and also as easy to see. So if normal with terrain is what most people want, that's what we'll get. So with that, I hope that does address that the best I can, because I saw some complaints about that, and we want to make sure to fix that if we can. So with that in mind, folks, it is time for us to move on into the question segment. And Matthew, what do we got?
All right, so once again, a big shout out to Marion Deemer for that $30 support, by the way, and also sorry for sneezing all over that super chat, Marion. But anyways, with that, we are moving on to our next one here, which goes to AMX10 Speedy Bang Bang, who puts in a $25 donation. And thank you very much, Mr. Bang Bang, for that support. We do appreciate that. They said your long North Korean segment yesterday was so funny, and even the bit with the shrubs growing on the runway, and I was having to pull over from driving my car from laughing at times. Your car was laughing. Man, that's crazy, honestly. He said you and Enforcer Matt are so good.
Hey, I thank you for the kind words, AMX10 Speedy Bang Man. Thank you for the massive support and help with the channel to keep running. And I had a blast with that segment the other day. I was just dying laughing, like, myself the whole thing. It was a good, fun segment. Like, we don't have a lot of segments where we get to have a lot of fun, because comedic clips are getting a little bit harder to come by these days. But those were just so funny. There's no way we couldn't have made fun of the thing. So I gotta thank you so much for enjoying that. I had a blast with it. I love to know that a lot of people really enjoyed it too, like you. And so a huge thanks to you so much once again. I hope that does address that the best we can. And so with that, we are on to the next one. Also, by the way, folks, I think the poll is unanimous at this point. In 1 minute, we've gotten 700 votes, and normal with terrain features is winning out by a massive margin. So really quickly, folks, before I forget, let me change all of these to be red then, so that way I can make sure that on the map it shows the front lines a little bit clearly, because I don't want this to be unreadable. And I thought the dark blue looked really cool, and I'll have to stick with my guns with it. It looks really cool, but as far as readability, it does make things pretty hard, because we've got light blue unit identifiers for friendly units on a dark blue background, which was a lot harder to read. So let me switch these to red, because these are the borders between NATO and the CSTO, or NATO and Russia. And I also made those pencil thin, so that way it wasn't taking up too much space on the map. But I do like to see that a lot of people are liking the map. It's just that some people didn't like the color, because this is taking a lot of work and effort to do. And so far, I have limited down the aspiration, just to make it clear for a moment to everyone. The other day, it was a global force disposition map where I was going to show all U.S. forces around the world. I've now decided that it's better just to show what's going on in Europe, because to be entirely honest, there's kind of a little bit of pressure behind the scenes to kind of get this ready as quickly as possible because of things that might be happening. So I decided to cut it down from showing everything around the world at, wherever it may be, to just Europe itself. So no U.S. forces will be represented in North America, in the Indo-Pacific, or in the Middle East. It will only be what is considered part of NATO, so Turkey is included, and everything else in Europe, and everything on the Russian side, and everything on our side. So that's what it's going to be at this point. So at the moment, it's still in a very rough draft form. The U.S. is represented entirely on the map. The United States is 100% complete. So that's all U.S. forces in Europe, air and ground forces. And then we also have the Estonians on the map, which didn't really take a lot to put them on because their entire military is just 2 brigades. So it was actually somewhat easier to do that today. All I had to do was put all the administrative stuff up here in Tallinn. So that's the Ministry of Defense, the General Staff, and then the Estonian division. But I mean, that's not too hard. So that was a little bit easier to do. Tomorrow, my plan is to knock out Latvia and Lithuania in one fell swoop. Their militaries are not too big, so I should be able to knock those out. And then from there, I'm going to start working on the Polish, and then the Germans, the French, the British, the Dutch, the Belgians, so on and so forth, until we have all of NATO modeled on the map. So it's going to take a lot of time, like, just to be entirely honest, this is probably going to take weeks to complete. And then I also have to do the Russians and the Belarusians and the Ukrainians, because the Ukrainians are also going to be on the map. So there's a lot that's going to be on this map. So that's why I also limited down to just being Europe, because I was like, damn, I mean, doing the whole world, this is going to be really tough. So we're just going to do Europe for now and then try and work on Indo-PACCOM and CENTCOM at a later date. And completely separate maps at that. So, hope that does address that the best that we can, at least from what I can say about the map and the progress on it so far. And also, once it's done, I'll be only using it on the channel for cross-reference, and if you want access to it, it is going to be put on our Patreon, because we generally want to try and keep that map within the channel as much as we can. And so with that, we are on to the next one.
All right, and our next super chat here goes to Howard Mendelson, another longtime channel viewer, and thank you very much, Howard, for that $20 support, and we do appreciate it. He said, if it's not the first time we lived through a nuclear threat, I remember 1962.
I gotta thank you for the support, Howard Mendelson, and I would have to say that is very interesting to hear. I gotta thank you massively for support and helping this channel to keep on running. And I gotta say, nuclear threats aren't entirely new. There were also some in 1985 as well, but still, it's always concerning to get around these sorts of bends in the road where this sort of a thing happens. So a huge thanks to you so much once again. I hope that does address that the best I can. And also, I see some people asking about something with the map. Actually, Brian Gonzalez is the one saying boats. We need boats. So I was going to do boats, but the problem is, or ships, if we want to call them that. Problem is that a lot of boats that a lot of European countries have are not that big. And also, I was going to model the U.S. 6th Fleet. You can actually see that there was a plan to do that down here. But the problem is that the U.S. 6th Fleet only has one ship that is permanently based in the 6th Fleet, which is the USS Mount Whitney, which is a command ship. So I was like, there's not really a point to do that too much. And also, it's a lot of additional work because those units rotate in and out kind of quickly. So I was like, I might want to just make it ground and air forces. So now this map is only going to be showing ground and air forces present. And if a war breaks out, I will most likely not include naval forces as well, because we really won't know where they are. And usually most ships that are at sea, like, there's like a general rough idea of where they are, but it's never accurate. It's like the roughest of roughest estimates. So I wanted to do something that where we had a little bit more surety about where everything was and what was doing. So with that, hope that does address it well. I was wanting to do that initially, though, but I had to scale it back because it seemed a little bit too ambitious once I started to look into what would be involved in even trying that. But with that, we are on to the next one.
Also, by the way, just because of so many people asking for it, a lot of people are interested, and I'll still say this, it generally hasn't jumped on our radar very much just yet, and the Enforcer covered it slightly earlier, but we are making some very large force deployments from the United States when it comes to a naval deployment down toward Venezuela. And just for context, we do have a $50 million bounty, the U.S. does, out on Maduro to take him into custody for being involved with some cartels down there. So he's not in the favor of the U.S. government. Maduro's in some trouble right now, and there's some pretty big naval deployments heading down that way. So, Enforcer, if you can go grab the first post off our Twitter page and give the folks a brief overview of a bare bones basics of how many of the ships are deployed. We do have those on a map from Ian Ellis showing the ships nearby. And apparently Maduro is getting so panicked from these deployments that he's speeding up mobilization of his militias. So this could be popping off. It might be jumping on our radar very soon.
So, at the moment, we actually see that some of the elements, this would most likely be of the U.S.'s second fleet, if I'm not mistaken. I think this is the U.S. second fleet. Let me go check that.
I believe
really
I think it's the fourth fleet, actually.
Damn, hold up. Wait a minute. I think the second fleet's in CENTCOM. Let me go check this. U.S. fleets. U.S. fleet map. Oh, no, they technically actually the Gravely, the Jason Cunham, and the Iwo Jima strike group is actually technically right now still in second fleet. Once they pass Hispaniola, which is where Haiti and the Dominican Republic are, and also Puerto Rico, they technically enter fourth fleet territory at that point. So right now, most of these forces are in second fleet, but they will be moving into fourth fleet here soon. Also, to show you all this, so that way people aren't like, what the hell are you talking about? Kind of like how there's global combatant commands for generally the whole world, there is something similar for the structure of the U.S. Navy. And let me get this map for y'all, the biggest I can get it. So this is the U.S. Navy fleet structure map. So any ships within these geographical areas on the planet fall within one of these fleets. So anything in the North Atlantic close to the United States is in second fleet. Anything around Europe and Africa is usually within sixth fleet, unless if they're near to the area of the Arabian Sea, which means that they would be in the fifth fleet. The seventh fleet controls pretty much everything in the Western Indo-Pacific. The third fleet controls everything in the Eastern Indo-Pacific and up to the U.S. West Coast. The fourth fleet's specific priorities is around South America and Central America. So right now it appears that there's a large shift of naval forces happening into fourth fleet's command. The USS Iwo Jima, along with the USS San Antonio and the USS Fort Lauderdale, which is pretty much an amphibious strike force, best way to describe it. The USS San Antonio and the USS Fort Lauderdale are amphibious support ships, and the USS Iwo Jima is a LHD, which is generally also specialized around the amphibious warfare operations role. The Gravely and the Jason Cunham are Arleigh Burke-class destroyers of, I believe it's called the 100 flight or Flight 100 types, which are some of the more advanced variants of the Arleigh Burke. And we can also see another 100 flight, USS Sampson, making its way through the Panama Canal, already under 4th Fleet's command. The USS Minneapolis St. Paul, which is a Freedom-class littoral combat ship, is already near to the coast of Venezuela, and there's apparently a fast attack sub somewhere out there in 4th Fleet, but we don't know which sub that is or where exactly it is at the moment, because that would be a massive OPSEC violation. So that appears to be what is currently moving into the Caribbean at the moment in 4th Fleet, and this is generally, like, as far as the San Antonio, the Lauderdale, and the Iwo Jima, that's a lot of amphibious capabilities that could be seen from that group right there. All three of them are amphibious warfare vessels.
Yeah, and also, if you're curious why this is suddenly a thing, why the U.S. is suddenly aggressing against Venezuela, it's because, like I mentioned, Maduro is alleged to be involved in a very prominent cartel, which has something to do with the narco issue in America. So that's one part of it. Also, by the way, another side issue is that apparently Venezuela and the Maduro regime has, in recent days, allowed a private Chinese company to start developing oil fields in Venezuela, despite the U.S. sanctions. So that's also another big thing as well. Usually when the oil starts becoming an issue, that's usually when military action gets taken at some point. So that's also another secondary thing. But overall, though, Maduro's regime is obviously not good. But the U.S. is not going to aggress on Venezuela just because we don't like Maduro. There's clearly going to be a strategic reason behind it. So I think between those two things I mentioned, that's pretty much the entire backstory to why this is suddenly becoming such a hot issue.
Yeah, it's a very interesting sort of a development, and it does look like there may be a small confrontation that will happen in South America here in the future, possibly, that might start to make it here into our news coverage. So this is ongoing development, at least at the moment. Also, by the way, we were able to see the Ian Ellis, who is the one who makes these maps, being impressive job, by the way, at doing this. He actually said that the Iwo Jima Amphibious Ready Group is back in Norfolk, in Virginia, to wait out the hurricane that's passing through. So once the hurricane passes through, they'll be back under way to head down to 4th Fleet. So the amphibious ready group will not be present. So there won't be any offensive actions taken by the United States until that amphibious ready group is there, if that's the plan. So this will still be a while away. It'll have to wait until the hurricane passes. So
I bet this right here is going to force Maduro to up the amount of emergency empanadas that he has in the desk drawer. He's probably going to at least pack them at least full, at least 2 drawers of emergency empanadas. This is a very stressful event.
Bro, he's going to be sitting there making those speeches. Those American bastards, oh, like eating in the middle of his speech, bro. That's what he's going to start.
I'll tell you what, that guy can like suck down an empanada. I've never seen anybody like inhale an empanada quite like he can. That guy can like stuff it.
Can we go find a video of that from Twitter really quickly, Matthew, where he was like horking down that empanada? Does someone have that out there for us to access real quick?
Let's see here. Wait a minute, I think I got it. Hold on a second. Yeah, I got it. I got it right here.
Get it up here.
I put it in the likes tab.
Oh,
I'm
hell
not sure
yeah.
if it's it shouldn't be copyrighted, by the way. It looks like it's from Venezuela state media, so it shouldn't be copyrighted.
Let's go look at it and eat that empanada.
Salir a unas tapas. Adelante.
He's about to do it. He's about to go for it.
Look, there he goes.
Sneaking it.
There he goes. He's grabbing it. Yeah!
Oh, look at that. Go.
Oh my god, man, he went, oh, he had half that thing in his mouth in less than a second. Man, this guy, he's something else. He's something else. But beyond that, looks like he'll have to start stuffing empanadas a little bit quicker. His empanada stuffing days might be over here soon, so we'll have to see. But still, absolutely crazy stuff. Man, I can't believe we found that so quickly. Really, like that was so quick.
Man, I'll tell you what, they call me the Twitter master these days. I tell you what, I'm just like getting in there. I'm so good at searching Twitter these days. I tell you, there's some people saying there's not much better Twitter searches than me.
Also, I gotta say, folks, like on top of that, how the hell, like, can he not even wait through his own speech that he planned to wait to eat that? Why in the world did he even just have one just sitting there in his desk drawer like that to whip open the desk drawer and just eat it? So he's got like an emergency empanada supply or something that he can call upon at any moment. I really don't know how that worked or why that worked that way.
I wish I had that. Like, I'll be honest, if I had an emergency empanada supply, I would be in good shape. But at least I'm not a dictator, though. Like, if you have to be a dictator in order to get access to the emergency empanada supply, I think I'll have to pass.
Yeah, I'd have to pass as well. I think I would. And then he also stole that last election. That's something that I really wouldn't want, just to have an empanada supply. That's crazy.
That guy's a clown, by the way. Like, just on a personal note, like, Maduro is a doofus. Like, that guy's a real doofus right there. He's like the stereotypical, like, goofy, cartel-affiliated idiot that happens to get in charge of some of these countries down here. He's just a clown. Like, that guy's, if it comes down to, like, an actual real crisis between the United States and Venezuela, that guy's going to go down hard.
I'll be honest with you, man. That guy is like a goof, like every neurotic dictator in the world. Like, all of them are goofy and weird and really bizarre. He's one of them. He's just like another one in the crowd. Because Putin and Lukashenko are as weird as this guy, really.
Yeah, they really are. I don't know why they all have that like same like aura about them. Like Lukashenko, he's got the same thing going on. It's like they're like not even in reality or something, I guess.
I mean, hell, they make an entire fiction around themselves. Like the whole country exists for them. Kind of like the Kims. Something, folks, that's actually crazy that I found out the other day? Back in the 90s, I was just shocked to find this out, folks. Back in the 90s, Hennessy actually had a customer report that came out and was slipped to the public. Turns out Kim Jong-il was the largest single customer of Hennessy during the 90s. He was buying like $800-something thousand of Hennessy cognac every year.
Just sipping that Henny, I tell you.
Bruh, running the country into the ground, sipping on Henny. Bruh, the guy was playing. But also, what was even crazier, man, is that he would have people, like, flown in from around the world, like Italy, France, and Japan, to cook him food, like sushi and stuff like that. Absolutely crazy. Insane kind of stuff. And that was in the middle of the Great March of Strife, as they call it in Korea, which is the huge famine that they had that killed millions. While that was going on, he was eating the most luxurious food possible. Like anything and everything that was the most luxurious, eating loads of it. Like funnily enough, he had thousands, no joke, of imported wine bottles like Bordeaux, Champagne, and other kinds of high-end wines that he would just store, and he made at his private villas these giant buildings that just stored them and cooled them to the proper temperature for them to age well. Like, it's absolute insanity. Like, that guy, like, really all the chems are absolute insanity. They're just nuts. And also another thing that's even nuttier, Matthew, Kim Jong-il got so crazy about this stuff. All the water that was used had to be harvested from Heaven Lake on Mount Pektu. So all the water they used from that lake. He also
I
had
wonder
to
how
have,
that compares to Fiji water.
I wonder, honestly. Like, I feel like volcano basin water would be pretty decent. But anyways, he also had to have all of his rice grains perfect. So people would sit there all day long and look at rice grains and measure them to make sure that they were the perfect length and width. And those were the only rice grains that he could eat.
Huh, that's weird.
Yeah, the guy was absolutely bizarre. Like, all of them are bizarre. But all dictators are like that. Like, Ceausescu, any of them. They're all weird, bizarre, freaky people. Like, none of them are, like, decent people. But anyways, with that, we are on to the next one.
All right, and our next super chat here is going to go to Chargy, by the way, and thank you very much, Chargy, by the way, for that $20 support right there. And he said, "Well, boys, my company hired the In-N-Out mobile unit." They have a mobile unit? I didn't even know that, by the way. That's pretty cool, though. And also, Chargy, I'm very proud to hear that, by the way. You hired the In-N-Out mobile unit. I would hire them too if we had them, but they said to show my appreciation recently that they did that. And I will report that burgers are as good as non-rolling restaurant version, and to take one from the chat.
And I gotta say, that is great to hear. I did not know that there was an In-N-Out mobile unit. That is crazy to hear, though, and really cool. And it's neat to hear that the burgers are as good from there as they are from a normal store. I gotta thank you for sharing that update with us, and I hope one day that I will be able to grace myself with the flavor of an In-N-Out burger. I'm very interested to know what they taste like. I've never had one yet, and I want one. I want one, and I just don't ever get one. I never get to have one. But still, I thank you greatly once again for support and helping this channel to keep on running. And with that, we will make sure to take one from the chat in your honor. So what do we got, Matthew?
And this one goes to Kendrick, who said, "Could Estonia preemptively mobilize due to Russia's false flag threats?"
Estonia could, but that could also be taken by the Russians as a buildup in preparation for war. So it's a kind of a double-edged sword. Technically, you can do that in defense, but it even gives the Russians a better reason to say, "Oh, look, they're getting ready to invade us. See, they're building up their armed forces to do it." And then that's what they could try and argue at that point. So you could, like, I think it would be justified, but then there's also a reaction to that that may end up backfiring in a sense. So with that, I hope that does address that live chat the best I can. And a big thanks to you once again for support, Sharky, and helping this channel to keep on running. And with that, we are on to the next one.
And our next super chat goes to Zyper Sniper 1, who puts in a $20 donation. And thank you very much, Zyper, as well, for that support. And they said, "Coffee fund for the enforcers." And thank you very much, good sir. He said, "And if Russia wants to attack Estonia, then we need to support our ally, and we will never leave our allies to the Russian bear. And much love from Norway."
And I completely agree with you, Cyber Sniper. I'd entirely agree with you. We should not ever do that. That would be a huge mistake to sell out a NATO ally. It doesn't matter if it's Poland, Estonia, or the United States itself. Selling out NATO allies is going to lead to the destruction of us all. We cannot do that. And I would certainly agree with you, Cyber Sniper. I got to thank you for being one of our Norwegian viewers and supporting this channel and helping it to keep on running. You know something? I might actually, in your honor, Cyber Sniper, spend tomorrow not only modeling the armed forces of Latvia and Lithuania, but of the Scandinavian countries as well, to kind of just complete that whole Northern European area in one fell swoop. Let me go check this out really quickly. Norway Armed Forces. Let me go look at this really quickly and see if I can show y'all something about this. So this is the coat of arms of the Norwegian Armed Forces. Goes pretty hard, actually. Pretty cool. But let's see here. The Norwegian Army, that's what we want. Do they have a force structure map on this page? Oh, they do! So, this is the Norwegian Army. This is the whole thing right here.
That's pretty good.
It's kind of small, actually. It's made up of one armored brigade, actually. That's actually pretty wild. They have an armored brigade. They then have an infantry, a mechanized infantry battalion, and then they also have a support brigade that's made up of a canine police unit. That's interesting. They also have like a kind of like an Arctic sled sort of a deal. And then they have some support. This appears to be some sort of a, let's see here. What would that be? That's a wheeled So that appears to be some sort of a wheeled mobile gun company of some sort, like a tank destroyer sort of a deal. I'd have to look into what that is exactly. And then they have a military police unit and a military intelligence unit that is attached directly to the general staff at the division level, because the Norwegian military is so small that their largest organizational element is a divisional level element, which is the general staff itself. So pretty interesting stuff right there. This wouldn't be that hard to model. Technically, on our map, the smallest unit that we depict is the regimental level unit, so the entire Norwegian military would be represented. But still, incredibly interesting stuff nonetheless. So a big thanks to you for the support, Cyber Sniper. And I think I can actually knock out that as far as modeling that tomorrow. What does the Norwegians have for an air force? So they have 102 aircraft. So they don't really excel in having a massive ground force, but they make up for that in the air force. So what did they have in particular? Holy smokes, 52 F-35s? Dang, man, that is nuts. That's actually huge. Let's see. 18 Bell 412s, which are Hueys pretty much. Some AW-101s. Those are pretty decent. And they also have some Poseidons for maritime patrol. So they actually, they don't have a big army, but they have a very decent air force, very competent. And that's a Norwegian F-35. You can see the little Norwegian Air Force roundel down there. Very clean looking. So yeah, I could actually model y'all's air force and ground forces probably tomorrow, and have that on the map. Because I'm wanting to save the big countries like Poland for later, because that takes a lot. Like, just doing 50,000 forces on the map, 55,000 technically, and 203 aircraft, which is what America has in Europe, took forever. So knowing that the Polish armed forces have about 300,000 men, that is going to be insane to try and put all that out there onto the map. And then I also have to do the Russians, and they have 1 million people on the map for the larger part. But I think I'm going to limit that just to the Leningrad military district, the Moscow military district, and the southern military district, and every other military district in Russia is just not going to be modeled. So if it's anywhere east of the Urals, those aren't going to be represented on the map, just to make it completely focused on Europe. So with that, I hope that does address that the best I can. A huge thanks to you, though, once again, for the support, Cyber Sniper, and helping this channel to keep on running. And with that, we are on to the next one.
All right, and our next super chat here goes to Old Warrior, another channel legend, by the way, and thank you very much, Mr. Old Warrior, for that $20 support. And he said, I seem to recall U.S. troops sent to Finland a while back, and was that just for maneuvers, or are they still there?
U.S. Marines were sent to Finland in a very small expeditionary force, and when I mean small, it was wildly small. It was only a couple of companies strong, and they only remained there for a few months. In something of a sort of an Arctic training operation with the Finnish, and then they left. So they're not really there any longer, and according to all the research I could do online, the U.S. Marines headquarters inside of Europe and Africa, which combines both of those forces, is pretty much only existent in name only. There's 1,600 Marines in Europe and Africa at any given time. About 200 of those are a part of the headquarters staff, and those Marines are wildly spread out. There's no permanent deployments, and the largest singular element that's been seen so far was in Thule in Norway in 2017, and that was 300 Marines in one place, which is 3 companies worth of Marines, so not even a big element. So generally, there are no Marines that are permanently stationed in Europe or Africa at all. You'll usually find Marines on the west coast of the United States or somewhere in the Indo-Pacific. That's usually where the Marines end up being sent, or to CENTCOM, but that's also kind of a little bit rare these days and fairly intermittent. But with that, I hope that does address that well, and a big thanks to you once again for support and helping this channel to keep on running. And with that, we are on to the next one.
All right, so let's quickly address the poll that's currently running right now. And the poll says, what is your 1-year outlook on world peace and stability considering all the recent developments happening around the world? So about 62%, the overwhelming majority, said the situation will turn into a major war, while 21% said the situation will stabilize somewhat, and 4% said the situation will fully resolve itself. And on this one, I don't want to sound like a doomer, so take my comments as objectively as you can, because I'm not trying to warmonger here. I'm also not trying to make this seem like it's doom and gloom, but I'm simply speaking from an objective sense based on what I'm seeing. I would say I'm with the 62%. This seems like this is heading toward a major war, and it may not be the Russia-NATO situation that turns into it. It could be something else that sparks it, to be perfectly honest. We're not really sure just yet, but the cohesion that we're seing amongst the new Axis powers, which is Russia, Russia, China, North Korea, Iran, and also some other ones as well. The cohesion is disturbing to me because that's also what happened during World War II. Half the world went on one side and half the world went on another side, which leads to obviously major wars and conflicts breaking out. Also, Russia has backed themselves into a corner in a really bad move, and now their economy relies on the war economy. And if they stop the war and they go for peace, their country might collapse. So that gives them a real reason to prolong the war and also maybe start a larger escalation because of that reason. Also, at the same time, the people that are becoming in charge of these Axis power countries are getting more and more radical and also getting more emboldened. Like, for example, Iran has about the craziest leaders we've ever seen right now. Also, Kim Jong-un, he's been a nut. And also, China, by the way, has their own territorial ambitions for Taiwan, and they're going to need their buddies in order to be able to pull that off because China doesn't want to go in that alone. They'll need their buddies. So that's why I think personally it's going to turn into that, because it seems like with the cohesion between the Axis powers, it just seems more likely than not that something is going to happen, because usually in history when this happens, usually bad things start happening. So, Enforcer, what say you?
I would have to say that I'll be with 62%. With how things are going right now, and if nothing changes, this will end up turning into a major war. It's either going to be one that happens in Eastern Europe, one in the Middle East, or one in East Asia. It's a guarantee, though, that one of these three areas will turn into something major, because nothing's really changing in any of the three areas, and it's just moving closer and closer to war. So that's what I would have to say. It's definitely going to be turning into a major war at some point here in the near future. And so with that, I hope that does address that the best I can, at least in my opinion, because I also had to be within the 62%. Also, for a lot of the reasons that Matthew said as well, I'd agree with him. And so with that,
I just wonder this time if it goes the way that I'm predicting. Now, during World War II, it took us a while to get into that one. Like the United States took a while to jump into it. So I wonder if this time, are we going to jump into it right off the bat? Because obviously this time there's NATO, so there's Article 5. That's a collective defensive responsibility that all partners have to adhere to, at least in theory. We'll find out if that's actually the case or not. But now with that Article 5, it seems like we're kind of forced, we're kind of compelled to jump in right off the bat if a world war does start, like we saw during World War II. It seems like it would be like that. But do you think the USA would stay out and maybe neglect their Article 5 responsibilities, or would we jump right in?
We may. It wouldn't be that unheard of. I mean, we did create the League of Nations back before, at the end of World War I, we created the League of Nations, and then we said, I don't like it, and then we hopped out. So it's kind of the same thing as NATO, really. The League of Nations was. It was a weaker version of it, but still similar, and we hopped out of that one and let World War II happen, and then we got dragged in because of Pearl Harbor. So, I would say that it's a possibility we might just sit it out for as long as we can, which isn't really the smartest move, but probably maybe an option that we could take.
Yeah, I'm not really sure, to be honest with you. The Article 5 thing, like, it should seem like, and once again, I'm 100% behind Article 5, by the way. If one of those countries in Europe gets attacked and they say, hey, we need help, like, we need help quick, if we don't honor that agreement, I'm not sure if the United States will ever recover from that credibility hit, because that is going to be such a massive credibility hit that I'm not sure if any European ally will trust us in the short term, or maybe even the long term, maybe for a very long time. That would be very devastating for our credibility. So I'm not sure. Like, I'm just really not sure at this point. Honestly, I hate to say it, and I'm not saying this, I still believe the West would win that war if a world war started, World War III. We would still win it, I would say, if you look at it from a traditional standpoint, you put the nukes aside for a minute. But at the same time, though, the disturbing part is I'm seeing more cohesion and unity amongst the evil forces of the world right now than I am the good forces. It seems like Putin, Xi, also the Iranian leaders, the North Korean leaders, even though they hate each other, they have more unity right now than the Western NATO states have, which is the complete opposite of the way it should be. Because in NATO and in the West, we genuinely have a reason to work with one another. We have a reason not to stab each other in the back, but yet that's what we're doing. The Axis powers, the ones I just mentioned a moment ago, they have a reason to stab each other in the back because they hate each other and they want to take each other's territory. So for them to have more unity than us, that is very, very disturbing to me.
I would agree. It is incredibly disturbing, and hopefully we'll be able to turn things around, at least as far as the cohesion of things here in the West before it comes to a head, although that might be easier said than done. But with that, we are on to the next one.
So our next super chat here goes to Nathan Ringerwald, and thank you very much, Nathan, for that $20 support as well. And he said, do you think Ukraine has the momentum to encircle the Russians in their latest counterattack? And if so, how do they leverage it for maximum effect?
I think it's possible. It's not entirely out of the question at the moment that they could try and do something like that. It's just that they're going to have to be a little bit quick about it. These sorts of offensives don't work off of careful precision. They work off of brutal speed and generally just, best way to say it's not really taking any prisoners to slow you down. So, that's what they generally have to do is they just have to move as fast and brutally as possible to close these Russian forces off and then fill up enough forces of their own in between them and the remainder of the Russian front lines that they can't break out and make it back to their own without suffering massive losses. So that's generally what I would say. At least from what I could tell, it would have to be something that's done quick and brutally to be able to succeed. And considering that this just started today, it's a little bit hard to tell whether the Ukrainians will be able to get that kind of speed and that kind of brutality going to be able to close off those Russians entirely and then destroy them in detail. So with that, I hope that does address that the best I can, at least in my opinion. But a massive thanks to you once again for supporting this channel, Nathan, and helping this channel to keep on running. And with that, we are on to the next one.
And our next one goes to Zyper Sniper 1, who puts in a 20. And thank you very much, Zyper, for that second support of the night, by the way. And he said, Russia says that they're not the same as the USSR. And then, honestly, Russia should be younger than Ukraine because Ukraine existed 24th of August of 1991, and the fall of the USSR was the 26th of December 1991. And Russia came to be, or am I wrong?
Oh, no, you're right. Like, technically, the Russian Federation is younger than the state of Ukraine by a good amount of months, because while Russia technically has been legally considered the successor state to the Soviet Union, and the Soviet Union was legally the successor state to the Russian Empire, it is brand new. It was only created on the 26th of December 1991, so the Ukrainians actually have the claim as a modern state that they are actually older than the Russians by just a couple of months, but still older nonetheless. So you're actually correct on that. On the legality of things, they are older as far as their country exists today. And a lot of people always want to legitimize a country and be like, oh, but Ukraine just didn't exist from 1991. There was a Ukraine way back in the day, the Zaporozhian Cossacks of the 17th century. But the reality is that none of those groups have anything to do with the modern state of Ukraine. It's hundreds of years ago. This is a brand new state, but that one is still older than the Russian Federation. Much like the Russians can't really legitimize their claim by going, the Zed, the Romanov family. It's like they're all dead. Like it's been 100-something years. There's nothing even similar to the Russian Empire anymore out there. The Russian Federation is pretty much a totally different country than the Russian Empire. Nothing even similar. But with that, I hope that does address it the best I can. Very good question, by the way, Zyper. And I hope that I answered that somewhat well. And with that, we are on to the next one.
Also, by the way, speaking of Russia being like a real state or a real democracy, etc., I just saw yesterday, it came across my recommended tab. It was a clip of Vladimir Putin talking about one of his old political rivals. I think his name might have been Mikhail Kordovsky, I think he was. He was like one of his adversaries way, way back in the day, like in the 2000s. And Putin was asked by a reporter in Russia, they said, what do you think of this guy mounting a political rivalry to you? And he's going to try to challenge you as the president. He's going to try to win the election. What do you think? He said, who is that? I don't know who he is. And then, of course, later, the guy mysteriously ended up in some trouble and mysteriously ended up ousted and also exiled from Russia, I believe was the story later. Or he got taken out and eliminated, one or the other. That was like the start of everything. It's like, the people that say that Russia is like a real democracy, it's like, do they not even see like what the guy does? Like anybody, even look, for example, a more modern example, Navalny, he got taken out in prison. Like every single like political rival he's ever had has been taken out or exiled.
Yeah, it's absolutely ridiculous, man, when people try and go, no, the Russians are a real democracy. It's like, no, they're not. Like, they're only a democracy in name. But also, I saw someone say something, this is the old line. I gotta be honest with y'all. I'm tired of this one. I consider this one to be communist propaganda. So I'm actually going to address this one for a second. Someone said, "Bros, that most people everywhere do not want war at all. It's the truth of humanity. This is all the will of the billionaires." And I gotta say this really quickly. Billionaires have nothing to do with this at all. No one. Like, I don't see Bill Gates or Elon being the one saying, oh, let's go to war. And I don't see any billionaires in Russia going, oh, let's go to war. I don't see that at all. What I see is a dictator in the Russian Federation continuously pushing the boundaries with NATO to see how much he can get to realize his own grand ambitions for his own Russian state. This has nothing to do with billionaires. And I hate to break it to everyone. Billionaires have nothing to do with any war that's ever fought anywhere ever. at all, ever. There's really no impact on that at all. Wars are fought for specific reasons. World War II wasn't fought because of billionaires. World War II was fought because the Nazis and the Imperial Japanese pushed the Allies a little bit too far. World War I was fought because a guy from Serbia shot a Austro-Hungarian prince, and the whole military alliances from both sides went at it after that because of the insult that was given. No wars are started because of some billionaire somewhere. And also, that's being a little bit naive, because if you sit there and say, oh, it's being fought for the billionaires, that's a little bit goofy, because when people sit there and go, oh, we went to war in Iraq and Afghanistan because of the oil. No, we didn't. Like, the reason why we went to war was because of all the people back home that were going to be bitching if the price of gas went up. We didn't go to war because of the oil. We went to war because, oh no, if the Kuwaitis are continuously crushed like that, and this oil supply isn't imported to the United States for us to refine into fuel, everyone's going to be complaining that the gas prices are too high, and then they're going to be bitching and whining. So we got to go over there and we got to reopen this flow of oil so that way they'll stop bitching and whining here in America. Like, that's the truth of it. That's really cutting it down to be brutal and honest, but that's also how everything's been done. Like, Americans are very whiny and complainy people. And that's just the way it is, and that's the way it always will be, because they want to sit there and say, oh, I don't like war, but when we don't go to war over something, even something minuscule, and we end up getting screwed over, and something becomes more expensive in the country, then everyone's all fine with spilling blood then because the price of a banana rose 25 cents a pound, or the price of gas went up another 15 cents a gallon. Then everyone's all fine with going over somewhere and killing someone. But when someone's doing that proactively, something along the lines of, we want to make sure that doesn't happen, then everyone goes, oh, come on, everyone. It's just the billionaires pitting us all against each other. Why can't we all just get along? The Russians are good people, and so are the Chinese. Like, they don't think that about anyone here in America at all. I hate to tell you that. That's just the truth. Russians and Chinese hate the United States. They hate Americans. They want to see America and Americans put into the dirt, and they want to see all of our allies put into the dirt with us. That's the truth. If you don't want to believe that, that's unfortunate. That's really living in a false reality at that point. But that's what we're up against. And also another thing that I have to say is that because wars are terrible does not mean that they're not supposed to happen. Paying taxes generally sucks, but that just doesn't mean that you're not supposed to pay your taxes. You're supposed to pay your taxes. There is a lot of things that you have to do in life, like paying bills, that a lot of people don't like to do, myself included, but you have to pay bills because that's just a part of life. Life isn't always going to be filled with roses and fine times. Sometimes you got to do things you don't want to do, and sometimes that's going to war. Like, that's just the truth of it. The war is an apparatus of failed diplomacy, and whenever diplomacy fails, that's just the next step, is to take it to a war and brawl it out and see what happens. And generally at that point, it's not even our fault, because we tried the diplomatic route most every time before a war starts. They refused the diplomatic route. This is the next step. It's not on us, it's on them. They could have met us in the middle, they didn't, so now they get war, and that's the end result of it all. So I hope that addresses that somewhat well, because I don't like the false arguments that are made about wars, like wars are never worth it. Like if they're never worth it, then you're saying that Hitler should still be in power is the basic answer, or the Imperial Japanese should still be conducting genocides across China. That's what you're really saying. Or you're saying something along the lines of, I don't know, this country should have never been independent in the first place, or that we should have never fought the U.S. Civil War and pretty much emancipated all of the slaves. That's what you're saying when you say that war is never good for any purpose ever in history ever, is that you're pretty much saying, I would like for all of these evils in the world to exist, and all of these things that would put us in a far less advantageous position to continue to exist and thrive, because I don't have enough of a spine to go out there and say that this isn't a great thing to do, but it's something we have to do, otherwise things are going to be worse for the rest of all time for everyone here in this country. But anyways, with that, I hope that does address that well, and with that, we are on to the next one.
And our next one goes to Nathan Ringerwall once again, and he puts in a 20, by the way, and thank you very much, Nathan. He said it for the map fun and also getting my last name correct.
Hey, and thank you so much for the support and helping this channel to keep on running, Nathan. And I got to thank you for the support, and I'm glad to hear that Enforcer Matt got your last name correct. And so a big thanks to you so much once again. I hope that does address that incredibly well, because it is folks like you who help to keep this channel running and make this thing possible. And so with that, we are on to the next one.
And a big shout out to Verna Weeks, by the way, who put in a $14 donation. And thank you, Verna, as well for that support. We also had a 10 from Blackhawk49, as well as a 10 from Dupper Bob, and a 10 from Thomas Diorazio. And they said, Slava Ukraine.
And a big thanks to you for the support. Verna Weeks, Blackhawk49, Dupper Bob, and Thomas Diorazio. And of course, Slava Ukraini, Haram Slava. And a big thanks to each and every one of y'all for the support and helping this channel to keep on running, because it is folks like y'all who help to make this thing possible. Really quickly, folks, before I move on, though, I got another good one here. Jeff Hood in the chat said, and this is the I gotta say, Jeff Hood, you were playing Russian roulette with this one. I think you might have lost. Jeff Hood said, the Japanese attacked the United States because we cut off their oil. Geez, do your history. Uh-oh. That was a bad one to say, buddy, because I actually have a bachelor's degree in history. I'm actually certified in history. I'm like CPR certified in that extent. And that's a very, very contrived sort of a statement to make that completely forgets the fact that the reason why we embargoed them is because they just got done butchering and dehumanizing everyone in the city of Nanking, now called Nanjing in China, and the Japanese were conducting a brutal war against the Republic of China across the whole face of China, killing millions of people, and also slaughtering any civilians that came along their way. I don't know if you've ever heard of what the Japanese were doing to the Chinese, but they were chopping off innocent civilians' heads. They were desecrating, in the best way I could say it, children. They were doing all sorts of horrendous things, and there's proof of it because the Japanese documented it. They took pictures of it. You can still find those, and some American veterans actually were getting those pictures off of the bodies of dead Japanese soldiers that were fighting on the islands in the Pacific. So we know that there's proof of what they were doing in China. It was absolutely horrendous, and America saw what they were doing and said, you need to stop this sort of stuff because it's absolutely brutal and barbaric, and the Japanese said, no, we're not, and that's why we embargoed them. So trying to make it sound like it was a one-sided thing, like we provoked them because we sat there and said, hey, we don't like y'all being bastards to all these people and butchering them and genociding them. We'd like you to stop, and they told us to get bent. And in response, we cut off their oil. Making that sound like we aggressed on them is absolutely ridiculous. Back then, America took a stand in its own sense against that kind of brutal barbarism that the Japanese were conducting across all of mainland Asia. And I would say that we were damn well justified in doing that. And not only that, we were damn well justified in everything that happened after that, after Pearl Harbor occurred. Because people don't really get it nowadays, but the Japanese of the 40s, the 30s and the 40s, are not the Japanese of today. Totally different way that they went about things, at least as far as warfare. And it was a very brutal kind of a time, a very barbaric time back then. Now we're great allies with them and friends, and I think that the Japanese provide a great deal to the Western Alliance. But when you look at it in the context of what it was back then, it's not like we did that unprovoked. I'd have to say that as far as trying to get a gotcha on the whole chat and me, that wasn't really a good one, because that's completely erasing the context of why we even embargoed them in the first place, which we had good justification to do that. So with that, I hope that does address that well, and we are on to the next one.
All right, and our next super chat here is going to go to Duncan VR, and he puts in a 15 Australian, and thank you very much, Duncan, for that support, by the way, and we do appreciate that. He said, if each of you were the president right now, what would you do about Ukraine and Russia? And both of you answer, and would you get rid of Putin and his henchmen? Now, we can't really get rid of Putin and his henchmen. That's one thing we really can't do, so that's not really an option there. But if I were the president, the first thing that I would do is I would follow through with the initial threat that we made against Russia, which was to put the secondary sanctions on their petroleum products. We need to do that immediately, right this second, to follow through with that threat, because we should have done it the moment we threatened that. We should have done it, but we've already kind of gotten behind the 8 ball, so we should do it immediately right now. That's the first step. Then number 2, we should warn Putin very, very, very carefully and very closely that if he does anything that aggresses on a NATO country again, like for example, an errant drone that goes into it, then there's going to be more ramifications that come onto him after that, because we know what that is. We should call it what it is. It's probing NATO's borders, and we shouldn't shy away from saying that. We should say that outright and let him know that that's what the case is. So I would also do this as well. I would also lift all restrictions on any U.S. weapons that can be launched into Russia. I would lift that immediately as well and tell Vladimir Putin that until he shows up to the negotiating table, we are giving Ukraine the ability and the right to hit anything they want inside of Russia, and we aren't going to tell them what to do. Ukraine's a sovereign country. We provided weapons to them. They're free to make whatever decision they want. If Putin doesn't like that, well, his answer is not to cry about it. His answer is to get to the negotiating table and negotiate in good faith. And if he doesn't like that, well, you know, he's a he's a free man. He can do what he wants if he wants to try to call that bluff. So I would say that's what I would do. But Enforcer, what say you?
I would have to say that, in my honest opinion, can you reread the question again?
What would you do if you're the president?
On what situation?
Ukraine.
Okay, so on the Ukraine situation, what I would do is, first off, considering where we're at right now, secondary sanctions should already have been applied right now. It should have been applied a couple of months ago because the Russians are operating in bad faith, and that's incredibly obvious. So we should have already gone and applied sanctions against the Russians, or should be right now. I would also say that as far as orders for the Department of Defense, I would say that more U.S. forces need to be moved into Europe. I would say that at least at the moment, we should start to move more air wings into the area. We're already pre-positioned at this moment to be able to support far more air wings than are currently present inside of Europe, and considering that air power is going to be one of the most important parts of an opening action in this sort of a war, and also considering that moving the Air Force over is one of the quickest and easiest things that we can do right now, moving over some additional fighter wings would probably be the easiest and quickest thing to do in a force posturing sense. The next thing that I would do is that I would have 5th Corps, or at least its Atlantic Resolve divisions, forward deployed to Polish joint bases that are near to the area just northeast of Warsaw, somewhere near to the city of Elk, or in between Warsaw, somewhere within that general direction. They need to be pre-positioned to where they're already going to be able to respond to an attempted offensive on the Suwalki Gap, or if a greater Russian offensive happens anywhere in Kaliningrad or in Belarus, we are able to meet those forces at a head and pretty much conduct a blocking action immediately, stopping any offensives from driving deep into the heart of Poland. As far as the Baltics are concerned, that's a little bit of a tougher situation, at least for their defense. That would be something that have to be game planned out, because they're probably going to get cut off for some time. We're not really sure how long, but they most likely will be cut off for a little while, and they'll have to fend for themselves. But we need to make sure that we are positioned militarily in the region to where we can strike them if necessary, or make it incredibly clear that we will strike them if necessary, either in a defensive or offensive action. And we also need to make sure to put down heavy economic sanctions on them to make it quite clear that ending the war would be within their best interest instead of trying to continue it on. I would also have to add in that another thing that the United States should do is meet any Russian nuclear threats with an equal, appropriate response. If Medvedev says that that Washington, D.C. is going to be nuked, then we need to move some sort of nuclear forces into the area publicly to make it incredibly clear that Moscow will also be nuked immediately within such a short period of time.
They did that. They did that with the nuclear subs heading over there to the coast, the public announcement. But the problem was, though, immediately after that happened, then they flip-flopped and they started inviting Putin to Alaska after that. So it's like, how do you send nuclear subs to the coast? Then you threaten Russia with nukes. And then you say, Vladimir Putin, come on to Alaska. Come have a chat with us because we love you so much and stuff like that. Just come on over to Alaska and we'll just talk. You can waste our time.
Yeah, I would say, like, we did do that, but I'd also say add in additional nuclear forces beyond the 2 nuclear submarines to make it incredibly clear that any attempt by them at a nuclear action will be met with immediate destruction. I would also add in that another thing that would be incredibly important to do, this one I think is wildly important, is to start moving more B-61 gravity bombs into the area, to also make it clear that even if they somehow broke through our defensive lines in Poland or in the Baltics and started rapidly racing towards other U.S. Army groups that were flooding into the continent, we would just start nuking Russian Army groups at that point on a defensive doctrinal level. Make it incredibly clear from any point they're not going to win. If they want to start an armed invasion, the 5th Corps is already right there at the Suwalki Gap. If they somehow push through the 5th Corps, their army groups are getting nuked anyway, so it didn't even matter. On top of that, if they want to go to a strategic nuclear exchange, we've checkmated them there. They might get us, but they're not going to live to see that victory. So we're pretty much putting it up there to them, the ultimatum. You're either going to calm down and you're going to meet us at a reasonable level, or everyone's going to end up most likely dying as a result of this stupidity that you keep on pressing forward with. That's the sort of ultimatum that we should give them. We gave them that ultimatum at Operation Able Archer in 1985. We did that during the Cuban Missile Crisis in 1962, and it worked each time. There's no reason to think that this would not work again. We already have a clear template on how to approach this, and the way to approach it is to not blink and to make the Russians blink. We're playing a game of chicken here, and however far we have to play that game of chicken, we will play it. Even if it means going into a war as an end result, we will do that. And they need to be...
If they just make the war so costly for Vladimir Putin to keep it going, that would be a very, very good first step. And that's where we went wrong, in my opinion. We went bad wrong when we backed out of the promise to put the secondary sanctions on Russia, because that wasn't the end all be all response. That was just the first good foundation to lay the groundwork for crippling the Russian economy. And we chickened out before we did that. We didn't put it on them, and that's still being used as leverage against the Russians. But the problem is, though, it's not leverage. That's the first logical step, is throwing those sanctions on them. And also, regardless of what we really think, we threatened it and we didn't follow through with it. That's not a good way to operate. You don't threaten something and then say, "Oh well, we'll give you another chance." That's called being weak, and that's called being called basically. I don't want to say it so bluntly, but it basically makes us look like we're liars. That's what it makes it look like. And that's not a good precedent to set when you're dealing with somebody as dangerous as Putin, because he takes that as weakness. And obviously it is weakness. He's going to say, "Oh, look, they don't mean what they say. I didn't think they meant what they said in the first place. I thought it was a joke, so I'll do whatever the hell I want." And that's why you can't operate like that. So if we would simply start with that, we could really, truly, in addition to the Ukrainians, what they're doing with the Russian oil refineries and the massive gas shortage that Russia's already having, if we put those secondary sanctions on Russia, it wouldn't matter if India, China, it wouldn't matter who the hell came to Putin's aid at that point. They would be in some deep trouble to the point where they really couldn't dig themselves out of it. So they have two options at that point. They can go and make a worse mistake by attacking a NATO country and starting a bigger war, or they can decide, this has gotten so expensive, we're about to collapse. Putin can think, my whole regime's about to come crashing down because the people are about to go hungry, they're losing their money, the companies are going bankrupt, we don't have any gas, we don't have anything. The people are about to rise up against me and take me out. So I got to negotiate. We got to do something to try to save the situation, because at the end of the day, Putin needs his position. He needs to be in charge. And if the people rise up against him, it's all over for Putin.
Also, on top of that, I would also add in, because the Ukrainian situation is also important at its basic level instead of just common European defense and NATO. The United States needs to provide more arms to Ukraine, not making them buy it, not making the Europeans buy it, just providing more weapons and congressional drawdowns to also make it clear there is going to be no financial burden that anyone has to undergo to see the Russians put into the grave for the large part. The United States of America will continue to give the Ukrainians the weapons necessary to put the Russian army in the grave like it should be at this point. So we need to make it clear at all levels in the Ukraine war and in a possible confrontation with us in NATO, the Russians are going to lose at every single turn. So best to cut their losses while they're behind right now than to really lose in the future in some way or another. And also to put it out there in another way, at least straight up from what I can say, if they're willing to threaten everyone's life in the West with nuclear destruction, then this is pretty much what mutually assured destruction is. The West just needs to hold the Russian people hostage and the Russian government by saying, if you do that, we will nuke you back. That's pretty much holding them hostage, because if they try and get us, we're going to get them in the end. That's mutually assured destruction, so they're never going to pull the trigger, because they know if they pull the trigger, they're pretty much ending up getting themselves at that point from our counterattack. So that's basically what we should be doing. I don't know why we're not, but that's pretty much the rundown, in my opinion, of what the United States should be doing in this sort of a situation. And so with that,
Unfortunately, real quick, while we're still on the topic, while we're still on Duncan VR's topic there that he proposed, let's address the poll because it has to do with it. It says, what is Putin's real ambition, the primary ambition for the Russian Federation? So 68% said he wants to retake all the former USSR states. So an overwhelming 68% said that. 19% said he wants to retake Ukraine territorially, and that's it. While 8% said he wants to create a new NATO rival alliance, and he hopes to band enough countries together to actually rival NATO. And first of all, I'll say this with confidence. They're never going to rival NATO. He can give that up if he's wanting to do that. NATO is the strongest it's ever going to be right now, and hopefully it stays that way with enough cohesion, but it's as strong as it'll ever get right now, and I doubt any other alliance is going to be able to match that as long as we stay cohesive and get along. But I would say, generally speaking, I'm with the majority. Putin's ambition is to rebuild or build the new Russian Empire. That's truly what he's trying to do. That's not propaganda saying that, because it made no sense to invade Ukraine unless he wanted to start that whole thing in motion. It made no sense to invade Ukraine. So it seems to me that Putin's being driven primarily by personal ambition, and his ambition is for his own legacy and his own ego. He wants to rebuild the Russian Empire so that way he looks like the glorious czar of the former decades. So that's what I think he's up to. Ukraine is just a stepping stone. That's the unfortunate part. That's just the beginning of it. If he feels that he can pull off the rest, he's going to do it sooner than later. But Enforcer, what say you?
I would have to agree. I believe, well, actually, I don't think he wants to retake all USSR states. I believe he wants to retake the territory of the former Russian Empire more so per se. Because if you look at any of the symbology that's been used by the modern day Russian Federation, they use the double-headed eagle of, well, I believe it's actually the triple-headed eagle, if I'm not mistaken, of the Romanov dynasty. We can also hear that Russia's territorial ambitions include Novorossiya, which was a part of the Russian Empire, not the Soviet Union, technically. We can also see that a lot of symbology used in the Donbass region is of the flag of Novorossiya, which once again is another neo-Russian imperialist sort of an action. Putin continues to talk about reclaiming only parts of Poland, not the whole of Poland, and the Soviet Union technically did not control a single part of what is modern-day Poland at any point in its history, rather than the invasion of Poland in 1939 and up until 1941 in Operation Barbarossa. So it's incredibly clear, based off of the territorial ambitions he's stating, he wants to reform the Russian Empire, with him being pretty much the Tsar in a sense, at least as far as the territorial concerns are going. So that's where his ambitions lie. It's incredibly similar to how Hitler had this absurd idea that he was going to not only recreate the Holy Roman Empire, but make it even grander with Lebensraum to the east. A fairly similar principle to that extent, with what Putin's trying to do right now. So I'd have to be with the 68%, but I also have to clarify, I don't think he's trying to reform the USSR. I think he's actually trying to create a second Russian empire of a sort. But with that,
Was Hitler on drugs when he started World War II by invading Poland, or was he not at that point?
actually, he was always on drugs.
Okay, I was wondering about that because obviously, being on drugs is obviously no excuse for what the hell that evil guy did. That guy was like the top tier evil, like worst of history, pretty much. But I wonder if Putin is on some type of drug or medication or something of that nature, because the way he operates is almost so delusional. You would think there was maybe substances involved, kind of like with the Hitler situation, but we just don't know that. Like, it's hard to know, like, obviously, but I wouldn't be shocked.
Yeah, he was actually always on drugs. Hitler was all the way from World War I, because when he got wounded in World War I think, which was in late 1915, he got addicted to morphine, and that pretty much started his whole drug-fueled craze for the rest of his life that he literally was in up until the point he, ended himself in the Führer bunker in Berlin.
Yeah, it's crazy that he was really on it that long of a time. When you really go back and look at the historical footage of him, like for example, at I believe it was the Olympics, like he's like sitting there like tweaking in the bleachers, like actually like tweaking, like a real crackhead. Because basically he was a crackhead, and he was just sitting there like bouncing around, bouncing back and forth, and scratching and all that stuff. It's like this guy was a legit like tweaker, like really, and he was in charge of a whole country and doing the worst things you could ever imagine at the same time.
But you know what's crazy is that everyone in Germany was on drugs, because there were no restrictions on drugs in the Weimar Republic or really in Nazi Germany. Like they had meth that you could buy on the store shelf at any pharmacy with no background check or prescription or anything. It was called Pervitin. You could just get it anywhere, and there was no restrictions on anything. So weed was completely legal, meth was completely legal, cocaine was completely legal. Literally any drug under the sun that you could think of in the modern day, except for the newer ones like fentanyl or anything like that, those were all available in the Weimar Republic and Nazi Germany with practically no restrictions.
That's wild, really. And it was kind of like that here in the United States to a certain degree as well. Like they had, less restrictions back in the day on things that were considered now narcotics. But, it's just wild. Like also they had the whole German military on it at one point as well. They realized, I just give that out to people, and those like become as delusional as the main guy, and they'll just go berserk.
Yeah, what's interesting is that the Harold-Taft Act in the United States is what pretty much ended that, which came out at the earlier part of the 20th century. It was actually, I think, around World War I or right after World War I, but that's what started to ban a lot of the public access to most kinds of drugs like cocaine, meth, all that sort of thing from just being out there, because as many of y'all know, Coca-Cola used to famously have coca leaf in it, real coca leaf. So, it made you feel really happy, and that's why Coca-Cola was the #1 drink in America and blew up pretty quickly. Everyone's like, hey, this thing makes you feel good. And it really was making them feel good. It had coca leaf in it, which is what makes, it's like a raw element that makes cocaine, coca leaf at least. Nowadays, they're not allowed to just put raw coca leaf in it. It's coca leaf extract. So the flavor's there, but the kick isn't there, to a sense. But beyond that, the Harold-Taft Act completely removed that from being a thing, and that was really around the time that Germany lost World War I, just around the years up to that point. But while everyone in the rest of Europe was restricting the just wild access to any kind of drugs that you could imagine with practically no restriction, Germany didn't. They just went through the Weimar era and the Nazi era with just complete access to any drugs that they wanted, and it showed. Let me go actually get y'all. Let's see here. A Pervitin ad from the day, because they actually would market it to housewives and stuff and be like, hey, you can get more work done with this stuff. Let me see. Well, here's some of the crazy stuff that just existed back in the day before the Harold-Taft Act in America. Cocaine toothache drops. Just stuff like that. Just crazy stuff.
Cocaine toothache drops. What the hell? I've never seen this in my life. What the hell is this? Is that real?
Yeah, this was real. Like, dude, the kind of stuff that they would sell back then, there was no restrictions at all.
It said instantaneous cure. What the hell?
15 cents prepared by the Lloyd Manufacturing Company for sale by all druggists. This was
druggists. Oh my god, man! It's like AI generated, like it almost seems like, or something.
This ad, by the way, is from 1885. Just to give you all an idea of how unrestricted stuff was back in the day. You can get your hands on this wherever. But I'm trying to see if I can find you all the housewife ads they had. Oh yeah, this one right here. Marketing meth to housewives to keep them thin.
Ugh, that's bad.
Well, I mean, this kind of stuff was common back then, all over the place. This all ended with the Harold-Taft Act, by the way, folks. This stuff didn't really exist throughout the whole of the last century here in America. But overseas, they would have ads for this stuff everywhere, like that one for pilots.
They really had him tweaking in the cockpit. They really had
legit tweaking. Yeah,
grinding his teeth, like grinding them back and forth. Doing that jaw maneuver and stuff like that. I tell you what, don't they call that like coke jaw or something like that?
I think something like that. Yeah. So what was funny is that the U.S. knew, like, the American public really didn't know that the Nazi Germans had access to insane amounts of meth at the beginning of the war. And so everyone was always like kind of shocked about how quickly they were able to advance, like in the Blitzkrieg in Poland and France, because it seemed like they never ran out of energy. So the U.S. actually came out with these food documentary reels for the Army, for people to watch, like an educational kind of thing, and they'd always explain it that the Germans had an access to some kind of super vitamins, and it all came down to the kind of nutrition that the German soldier had access to. So America was learning all about nutrition to try and get our boys up to the fighting level of that German nutrition that they were getting, and we knew, like, the higher-ups in America knew it was just straight meth. But we didn't want to tell anyone that they were going up against drugged up, meth-raging idiots. So we told them that it was some sort of like a super vitamin or a super pill that they were getting instead.
That's very deceiving. That was back during the times where they really just dupe people into doing all kinds of stuff. Like, just like, oh, here, like, do this. It's totally safe, and they knew it wasn't safe, like, the whole time. It's kind of like that.
Well, we never gave anyone in the U.S. Army. Well, some people in the Air Force actually would use, the Army Air Corps would use meth or something along those lines to keep them awake in long missions. But in the Army, none of them got that. Like, we would just tell them, oh, like, it's some sort of a super vitamin or a super pill that they get, but we can just match that with good nutrition, so have some extra eggs. Like, that's what we would do. The Germans, on the other hand, were like, hell, give them meth. Like, just meth them up and let's see what happens. Generally, though, they phased that out, actually, crazily enough, by the early part of 1941, because a Nazi scientist actually did studies on the German invasion of France while it was happening, and he was like, oh my god, like, yeah, they can march, like, endlessly while they're high on meth, but the crash is so bad, it disables them for, like, a week after that. So then the Nazi German government was like, oh, this actually is bad. Like, this isn't doing them any good. So then they completely stopped issuing meth to everyone, but then they were all addicted to it, so they were suffering withdrawals. So they would write, Mutter, Vater, please send meth, and then their parents would send them the stuff. So it was just bizarre, like, really. But that's kind of the story of all that back then.
I hope one day they're not like that about caffeine. They're not like, can you believe they had the whole world hooked on this stuff? Now, I'll personally be like, hey, look, like, it's just caffeine, we got to have a little something. There's nothing wrong with caffeine.
Yeah, I would say there's nothing wrong with caffeine. Also, Christian Cruz said the Air Force still uses Go pills today. They're not meth infused, though. They're apparently wokefulness stimulants or something. That's what they call it, like, to keep you awake. It's like
a woke pill?
What? They're turning the freaking. But anyways, it's like a woeful awakening. It's like just jacked with caffeine, from what I've heard. It's not meth anymore, because the last time the actual amphetamines were used here in the U.S. was during the Gulf War in 1991. They apparently 50% of pilots in the Gulf War were issued amphetamines and did use them, but that was the last time in U.S. history that we issued amphetamines to pilots. Since then, it's been some sort of a pill mixed with great deals of caffeine and other kinds of things that help you to stay awake, but they don't jack you up on meth. So like it's you are right though, Christian Cruz. They still actually have those for pilots. But with that, we are on to the next one.
All right, so jumping into our next super chat, this one goes to LC39A once again. He throws in another massive support, by the way. This time a $141 donation. And a huge shout out to LC39A for that massive support tonight. I think he's thrown in a combined $300 support, which is obviously humongous, and we do appreciate that. And he said, after World War II, the U.S. helped Japan to become an industrial power, and as a child, all cheap toys were made in Japan.
And I thank you for the support, LC39A. And you're right, we actually did help them a lot after World War II. We actually had something that we kind of call the Asian Marshall Plan, but it was to help rebuild Japan. And at the time right after that was actually called the Japanese Economic Miracle. That was the big thing about post-war everything that had to do with America, is that they went through this economic miracle phase. Like there was the German economic miracle, the Japanese economic miracle, and then kind of detached from all of that, the South Korean economic miracle, which kind of was on their own doing for the larger part. But Japan became a huge industrial power after the war. They already were a really big economy pre-World War II. They became a huge one afterwards, especially exporting any goods to the United States of America. That was their biggest market. And it was a really interesting time, actually, as far as that goes. That's really the time that modern Japanese culture as well really blossomed, like many things that people would have cultural touch points with today in America, like anime or a manga or anything like that. That really started to pop up after World War II during that time of huge economic prosperity, and also other things that a lot of people I know from all generations would know, like the Gundams or Astro Boy or Power Rangers, generally all that stuff, Godzilla, all that stuff was during that huge economic boom that happened right after World War II, because not only was their industry booming, but their expendable income was also booming. So a lot of huge additional entertainments or kind of like media started to pop up after the war, and a lot of those were it. So pretty cool stuff, really, when you think about it. It's like, wow, that's neat. Like Japan, like World War II was a really, really bad thing for everyone involved in the Pacific, especially the Japanese, with how we pretty much destroyed every single one of their cities to the ground. But in a sense, it also helped them to turn Japan into what it is today, which is generally considered by a lot of people to be incredibly interesting and incredibly neat and a really cool place. And we also consider Japan nowadays in America to be great friends of the United States. And I have to say, I consider the Japanese to be a great nation, an upstanding nation nowadays. And so a huge thanks to you so much once again. I hope that does address that well. And with that, we are on to the next one.
And our next super chat goes to Demanoak, who puts in a 20. And thank you very much, good sir, as well, for that support. And he said, no better time to take sub-nukes out as right now.
And I thank you for the support, Demanoak, and I'd have to agree. I think that we always need to keep a strong nuclear deterrent against the Russians to keep them in their place, which is beneath the Western sphere. So big thanks to you once again for support. I hope that does address that well. And with that, we are on to the next one.
And we have a $20 support from Demanoak once again. And thank you for that second support, by the way. He said that thanks to LC39A, also Nephew Guy, and some other top super chatters as well for helping to keep the channel going.
Hey, and a big thanks to you for the support once again, Demanoak. And I gotta say, LC39A and a bunch of the other massive supporters, like Da Vinci Studio Design tonight, and Danny B, and Marion Deemer, and everyone else, they help this channel to keep on running. I gotta give every single one of them a huge thanks, because their support helps us to be able to keep the lights on here and keep working on this every day. So a huge thanks to you so much once again. I hope that does address that incredibly well, because if it wasn't for folks like you and everyone else, we wouldn't be able to keep this channel possible and keep it rolling. And with that, we are on to the next one.
And our next one goes to Ing X, and he puts in a 20. And thank you very much, Ing, for that support, by the way. He said, hello, Enforcers, and how and when do you project this orc special shit show is going to end? And I'll say on my side of things, I predict, here's my prediction, and hopefully this isn't too dark. I predict it's going to end with us on the front line. That's how I predict it's going to end. The Russians are going to drag us into the depths of hell, because the nut that's in charge of Russia right now, Putin, doesn't know that he's made a dire mistake, and he doesn't doesn't know how to dig himself out of the hole. So he's going to drag us all into it, and the West is going to have to be basically dragged down into the gutter to fight him, because otherwise he's going to start mowing down and taking all the former USSR states. So that's the way I see it going. I really don't see a positive end to this. Now, obviously, I predict we'll probably come out on the other side of it very strong. Obviously, a war torn at that point, but very strong. But I think it's going to go that way. Personally, I don't really see a negotiation ending the situation. I really also don't see Putin backing off and realizing he's made a mistake either, because he's got too many friends encouraging him to keep going. Like, for example, Iran, China, etc., and North Korea. So why would you stop if you have encouragement and you have friends behind you? That's just my take. But Enforcer, what say you?
I would have to agree with Matthew on that entirely. I'm not really seeing a way for this to resolve in a peaceful means at this point. And I also think that this might turn into a greater war at this point as well. Not to sound like a fearmonger, because we never really done that in the history of the channel. But it's starting to get to the point where if nothing is changing at this point, it's going to turn out that way. So with that, a big thanks to you for the support. I hope that does address that well. And with that, we are on to the next one.
And we have a $10 support from Max Nightman. And he said the sign language lady was probably AI.
Oh no, she was all real. That kind of sass is real. No AI made there. But a big thanks to you for the support and help this channel to keep on running. And with that, we are on to the next one.
And our next one goes to Mechtild, who puts in a 10. And thank you, Mechtild, as well for that support. They said, fellows, please help me out. And I heard said Zelensky, also wants to be a dictator. I can only imagine who said that, by the way. They said, I was shocked. And do you agree or disagree? And what do you think?
I would disagree. Because anyone who says that Zelensky is trying to be a dictator isn't really working within the full confines of what the situation is. The Ukrainian constitution lays out specifically that elections cannot be held in wartime, meaning that the elections are frozen. He can't have an election. He cannot stop being the president until this conflict ends by constitutional law. That's just the case. And so a lot of people who are trying to make the claim that he's a dictator are saying that because there are no elections being held in Ukraine. And that's the way their constitution is structured. And the Ukrainian constitution doesn't really have a way to be able to amend that specific section of the constitution, from what we understand. So nobody can amend it. It's on the book, and nothing can be done about it. So, that generally is probably the best thing I can say. As far as that, anyone who tries to make an argument that he's being a dictator, I mean, you can make that argument about anyone here in the West. He's conducting an anti-corruption campaign. Everyone conducts anti-corruption campaigns. He's trying to steal money out of the government. Everyone does that. it's
Zelensky is stealing money out of the government. There's no evidence of that.
Well, like, let's say even if there was any evidence of that, everyone does that. I mean, a lot of people would say that America is a democracy. Name one politician, either in the House or the Senate. We'll name a politician. I'm sure many of y'all can, or a president that has skimmed a little bit of money off the top. A lot of them have.
Well, I wouldn't say they're stealing or skimming money. The problem is they're accepting money that they shouldn't accept from donors. I think that's the problem, because you can't just really take money off the top of the federal government. It's something that really can't happen that easily. I'm sure it's happened in the past, obviously, but I mean, they can't just go in there and take a withdrawal or something like that out of the Federal Reserve Bank. It doesn't work like that. But they can accept money from sources which they shouldn't accept money from. Like kickbacks and things like that.
Yeah, but something like 10% of Intel, something things like that.
Well, that's not really like that. I would disagree personally. Now, obviously I'm not debating the merits of whether or not that was good or bad, but that's really not stealing anything. That's just making a deal which some people may or may not agree with.
But things that might or might not need to be done, being done, that sort of a deal that can generally be seen as something that you could argue that Zelensky might also be doing if we were to say that those allegations are true, but everyone in the West does that. So I would generally say that a lot of the arguments about Zelensky being a dictator are not true. Now, if the war ended and then elections were to be held, and then he refused to hold elections, or he rigged an election clearly where he won 80% or 90% of the vote, that would quite obviously show that he is a dictator at that point. But for now, there's really no proof to show he's a dictator. It just shows that he's a Ukrainian wartime president, and constitutionally there cannot be an election at this time. So I hope that does address it the best I can. And thank you once again for support and help this channel to keep on running. And with that, we are on to the next one.
Also, by the way, a lot of people were mentioning insider trading. That's technically really not stealing money either, but it is taking information that they had an unfair advantage to gain that information, which is usually being in private, closed-door meetings with the government, which usually is the source of their information, and then they go and trade based on that information. That in itself is illegal, but the problem is proving that person did it and then actually successfully prosecuting them and getting around all the favoritism. That's a hard part. Insider trading, not legal. That is not legal. But also, it is legal right now for politicians to trade stocks. Which, me personally, I say to solve the problem, just ban them from trading stocks. Period. Like if you're in the government, you're getting a pretty decent salary as a senator or a congressman or a congresswoman. You're getting a very generous salary already. So why are you needing to trade stocks in that position? I would say just ban that outright, because obviously there's a clear conflict of interest with them having access to information that we don't have access to as citizens. That's obvious. I mean, that doesn't take a rocket scientist to figure that out. But anyways, moving on to our next one here. This one goes to Espen Turgenhagen, and he puts in a 10. And thank you very much, Espen, as well, for that support. And Enforcer, what say you?
I gotta thank you so much for the support and helping this channel to keep on running, because folks like you have made this thing possible and help us to make this thing possible. And with that, we are on to the next one.
And we have a 10 from Zyper Sniper 1 once again, and he said, I just started to watch my favorite childhood series, Avatar, The Last Airbender again, and if bending of the elements was real, what element would you want to bend? Fire, earth, air, water, and mine is earth.
I'll probably agree. I think I would do Earth. I think that'd be pretty cool. And so a big thanks to you once again for support and helping this channel to keep on running. I hope that does address that well. And with that, we are on to the next one.
I'll be honest, if I could bend some element, I'd be bending some titanium and selling that straight to the defense companies, because that's a huge part of the money that goes into titanium, is trying to simply machine the titanium and also bend it. If I could bend some elements, I'd be bending titanium. I'd be selling it straight to them at a nice markup. But anyways, jumping into our next one here, this one goes to War Ranch LLC, who puts in a 5, and he said Oklahoma LSA.
Hey, and LSA, and a big thanks to you for the support, War Ranch LLC, and I got to thank you for being one of our viewers from Oklahoma. And so with that, a big thanks to you so much once again for support. I hope that does address that well, because it is folks like you who help to make this channel possible and keep it running. And so with that, we are on to the next one.
And our next one here goes to none other than Jason Curling, and also Espen Turgenhagen once again, who puts in a $5 donation, and this time did not leave comments. But thank you very much, Jason and Espen, once again, and we do appreciate that. We also have a 5 from
Japanese viewer.
Characters. Japanese viewer. I can't read those characters, though. It looks like a stream, some facial hairs, and one horizontal line. But obviously that is Japanese, and I don't know how to read it, so I'm trying to be facetious here. But they said, could Russia be planning to use Estonia as a bargaining chip for NATO to abandon support of Ukraine?
And I thank you so much for the support, Sammy, and helping this channel to keep on running. That's actually Japanese for Sammy, actually. I just went and pulled that up right there.
Sammy.
Hey, we did it. We figured out what your name is in Japanese. But beyond that, I would say there's a possibility, but there also is a possibility the Russians might just be going for a quick and easy land grab, seeing how weak current leadership is here in NATO. So I do thank you for support and helping this channel to keep on running, and I hope that does address that well. And with that, we are on to the next one.
And our next one goes to David Gear, and David puts in a 5. He said, sorry I haven't been around much. I started a new job, and also congrats, I hope it's going well, by the way. He said, my question is, did the president state earlier this week that troops would be sent to Ukraine and LSA?
No, he didn't. He kind of like inferred that we might give an air shield to Ukraine, or we might put troops on the ground in Ukraine as a security assurance post-war. But then he backed off of all that completely, it seems, at this point. So generally, no, from what we would know at the moment. But a big thanks to you so much once again. I hope that does address that well. And with that, we are on to the next one.
And our next one goes to Nathan Shin, who puts in a 5, and also Luke UK and Bradley Burdett, who each put in a 5 as well. And thank you to all 3 of you very much for that support as well. We also have a 5 from Jason Curling, who said, what is the status of India giving Russian oil? And will the USA tariff India again? And thanks.
It appears that we most likely will. The Indians have not backed off. In fact, they've deepened their relationships with the Russians. So I think that they most likely will get tariffed again here soon. So a big thanks to you for the support, and we are on to the next one.
And Nathan put in a second $5 support and said, free Ukraine, I love the support.
Hey, and thank you so much for enjoying the channel, and I'd agree with you. I hope that Ukraine is freed here in the future. So a big thanks to you so much once again, and we are on to the next one.
And this one goes to LSA Sergeant Figment, who puts in a 5. He said, I feel like modern day officials might be similar to Chamberlain from the former British Prime Minister. Do you think I'm wrong?
I wouldn't say you're wrong at all. I'd actually say that's a pretty decent assessment. A lot of them are very scared and afraid of confrontation. But a big thanks to you so much once again for support and helping this channel to keep on running. Legend of the channel. And with that, we are on to the next one.
And we have a 5 from Joe. And Joe said, first timer trying to learn. If the U.S. keep giving Ukraine aid, why don't they just go in and shut Russia down?
The reason why is because they could nuke us all and kill us. At least that's the reason why we don't get directly involved, because we were wanting to try and avoid a full-out nuclear war, which is what that might turn into. So that's why we're not really going in and shutting it down right now. And so big thanks to you for the support. I hope that has addressed that well. And with that, we are on to the next one.
And our next one goes to Squirrel, who puts in a 3, and also Plazoth, who puts in a 3 as well. And a big shout out to our channel Squirrel for that support, and also Plazoth as well for helping to keep us running. And we also have a 2 from Dubstep Kid 801, who said LSA for life and love you all.
Hey, and thank you so much for your support, Dubstep, and we love the LSA as well. A huge thanks to you so much once again, and we are on to the next one.
And we have a 2 from Robert Krogan, who said, I know it's not much, but LSA.
It's a lot to us. We thank you for the support, Robert. And we thank you for enjoying the channel enough that you find it worthwhile to support it. So a huge thanks to you so much once again. I hope that does address that well. And with that, we are on to the next one.
And our next one goes to Derek Pruce, who puts in a 2. He said, which brother has the bigger following, LOL? And T1FC, take one from the chat. And I'll tell you this, Derek, this channel would not be what it is today without either one of us. We have each put our blood, sweat, and tears into this thing through thick and thin, through things that we've never even spoken about on the channel before, hardships in the background. And this has been the one thing that has succeeded thanks to everybody here enjoying our work. And we are very proud of it. And without either one of us being involved with it, it would definitely not be what it is today. So, and also, it would not be what it is today without the audience that we have here, like you, Derek, being here every single night as well. And that is something that is like extremely prideful, or not prideful, but extremely proud moment for us to see what it's turned into. So a huge shout out to you. And Enforcer, what say you?
I'd have to say it's definitely Martin. I know y'all have never heard of Martin, but he's one of our brothers. We never told y'all about that. We have this whole other brother out there. His name's Martin. He's probably the most popular of the three of us. I'm just kidding, by the way. There is no other brothers. It's just Matthew and me. But we never like to make it a competition like that, because this channel lives and dies through both of our efforts. I'm very particular on the kind of things that I do, like this, I actually had someone tell me the other day when I was making this map that I have a touch of something, and I was like, you know what? I'm not really going to disagree with that anymore. That might be the case. But it's a particular kind of a thing, and Matthew's very particular in his own way in that sort of an extent. Together we combine, and my shortcomings and Matthew's shortcomings disappear because we're strong and generally the opposite things from each other. So we don't really like to compete like that, because this channel this channel doesn't it does succeed by both of our efforts combined, and has been for years. So I do thank you for the support. It's just that we never want to make it a competition like that at all. And also on top of that, it doesn't really matter, because whether people like it or not, we're both going to be here forever. Neither one of us are going away. It's not like someone's like, oh yes, I'm the favorite one, because it doesn't really even matter. The channel lives or dies off of both of our efforts. So with that,
we even have our disagreements, and very heated disagreements in the background, and the channel still persists. That is something right there that a lot of people can't even say. Sometimes things live and die on major disagreements, but we've worked through all of them throughout the years. And also we've been thrown wrenches into the system for years as well, that we haven't even spoken about on the channel, because obviously we obviously get into personal things sometimes, but we don't get into everything. So yeah. Also, Sire said, is this channel your first venture as brothers? It's the first proper venture, yeah. I did help Andrew with his city council run a while back. Say what?
City council campaign, yeah.
Yeah, I did help him with that. I was his campaign manager for that. But this is the first proper real world venture outside of that we've worked together on, in a formal setting. So yeah, this is pretty much the first one.
It's crazy, folks. It was actually crazy how we did that, because we went up against someone in the town that I ran for city council in. I was 18 years old, and the guy we were going up against had been in the city, well, the town, for 30 years. And somehow, like, honestly, I'm kind of shocked by this when I think back about it, because I was only 18, and we somehow managed to run that campaign well enough that we ended up getting nearly a quarter of the vote in that election at 18 years old. I was like, that is
Not
actually
bad in a traditional place where age is a huge deal, and also being like well ingrained and old in the town. Like this is the type, like small town like Alabama place where unless you've lived there your whole life, you're traditional, you're older, you're considered wise, you don't really stand a chance of winning. So the fact that you got any of the vote was quite wild.
Yeah, it was actually crazy. We were like, oh my God. Like, I remember feeling like absolutely crushed, but looking back on that years later, like, that was an absolutely crazy sort of an idea at 18 years old, literally right out of high school, to try and run in a city council election. Like, I don't even know why in the world I would think that that would succeed, but even getting close to a quarter of the vote, I was like, damn, I was like looking back on that now, I was like, that was not that bad. Like the speaking points must have been pretty good. And on top of that, that town that I ran in, that thing is making state news about every week at this point for like insane corruption issues. So like we were absolutely lucky to have even made it to this point. So I mean, that was kind of crazy when I think back about it. I'm like, no way. And like, like it was like a lot of the speaking points you'll hear me say these days, those were like my speaking points back then. Pave the roads, make it nice, provide basic infrastructure at a high level so that way it would spur growth. And what's crazy is that we lost the election, but pretty much everything, like, it's so crazy, folks, because I said, bring a Chick-fil-A, bring a Publix, bring stuff, because to explain really quick, like, this is so crazy. I have to tell you all about it because it still gives us a laugh to this day, because we absolutely scared the shit out of the people who ran the place. So the little town that is our hometown is Wetumpka, Alabama. It's a little place, but it's kind of like a suburb of a sense of Montgomery, Alabama, which had turned into an absolute hellhole by the time this election was running in 2020. It was a terrible place, rife with crime, still is. Anyone who's from Alabama knows that. So my whole campaign spiel that I came up with, because Matthew was like, well, what do you want it to be? I was like, I want it to be move everything away from Montgomery that people have to go into Montgomery for, so that way people don't have to go there because it's absolutely dangerous. So we were advocating bring Chick-fil-A, Publix, other things that people love to go to and line up around here to get to, and also pave the roads and make things nice to encourage people to come up here, live here, and open up nice businesses here. That was my whole shtick. And so it got the city so scared that they were going around, like we would place our campaign signs.
I wouldn't go into all that personally. I wouldn't go into all that.
Well, I mean, it's something that they made the news for again recently, but beyond that, still, generally the city administration did not want us to win, and we're trying to set the cards to make sure we would not win. We still got 20% of the vote. We then moved out of that town about a year later, I think, or less than that. And it turns out now I went back down there. They're paving roads. A Publix has opened up, and a Chick-fil-A is about to open up. I was like, no way.
Oh, yeah.
Literally all my campaign points, they're doing them. I was like, no way.
We made a video like showing like the concept of like these places moving to the small town that we lived in, and showed it. And I don't think anybody in the town had ever thought like, oh, well, we can actually bring that stuff there. It's kind of sad actually that that town had been stagnant for a long time, and we were like the first ones to ever propose that at our very, very young age, like fresh out of high school. And only after these young 20-year-old guys like finally made that a big point that they actually think, oh, well, we actually can do that. And their ideas were good, because we were proposing like tax incentives to bring those companies to the town. And apparently the city leadership had never considered that before, because it had been decades and those companies never came there. And it wasn't like there was a sudden explosion in population that brought the companies there. It was simply just not a matter of lobbying for the companies. So it was basically just stagnation, and nobody was doing anything about it. So it took a 19-year-old and a 20-year-old to say that for them to finally jump on it.
Yeah, and then they started, well, I'll be honest with y'all, they started to take it in a way that I didn't like, because I went down there, and now it's like, it's like now a lot of the old stores that were there, like the ones that I knew of here in this little downtown area, they're kind of gone, and they've all been replaced by like art shops and stuff, because right after that, Hometown Makeover from HGTV came through. I think they did like a couple of things, but they put Wetumpka on the map to a sense. And so a lot of those sorts of stores started to move in. Nothing wrong with them. It's just that there isn't really a lot of variety, but there are some great restaurants. Like, I'll say that there's some great restaurants down there. Like, one, I have to give them a shout out. The Kursk Cleaver is probably the greatest restaurant in Wetumpka. If y'all ever go through there, tell them you got a personal recommendation to go there from the enforcer. They have this thing called a meatloaf burger, and it is insanely good. It is so good. Great food. But beyond that, like, they ended up implementing a lot of the campaign policy points that I had, that Matthew helped me to put out there, because Matthew was like the one making all the videos. I would talk about my points. He would make the videos, masterfully make them. We made a hit piece even on the opponent, which ended up spreading from our city all the way over to Prattville and Millbrook, which are like, people knew about that when they called him the Streak. But it was a crazy thing. It was cool though. It was cool because at 18 years old, getting 20% of the vote, looking back on that, that was actually insanely good. I thought it was terrible at the time. Grown up now, I'm like, wow. Well, not even grown up, just 5 years later or so. That was actually insanely good for an 18-year-old. But anyways, with that, I hope that does address that well. And with that, we are on to the next one.
And our next, also Bruce Lee said, in Loveland, Colorado, they set up economic zones where sales tax was like another 2% to pay for infrastructure upgrades. That's like above the pay grade for like where we grew up. We didn't grow up anywhere like, for example, like that. The thinking was not very forward where we grew up. It was extremely traditional, extremely stagnant, and also stuck in old ways. And unfortunately, small town Alabama is like that across the state, and it's largely why it gets the stigma it gets, because people are very adverse to change. Now, there are places in the state, obviously more metro areas, they are more accepting of change when it comes to like positive changes for the cities. But when it comes to small town Alabama, there's a huge emphasis on keep it the way it is, and if it's not broke, then don't change it, which is not good for growing a place. It's only good for keeping it, mediocre, basically. But anyways, jumping into our next super chat here, this one goes to 3NDY, who puts in a $50 donation, and thank you very much, good sir, for that support. They said, two-front war. China invades Taiwan, Russia invades the Baltics. How do NATO and the U.S. manage resources, logistics, and politics? And if North Korea invades South Korea, how does this three-front war impact the West, and what are the risks and challenges?
So generally, a three-front war like that is actually possible and manageable for NATO and the United States. Europe is a huge military power, and while I was talking earlier tonight about how Estonia is incredibly weak militarily, they are really one of the only ones that is incredibly weak. For most other countries in Europe, they are hitting pretty powerfully, and if you combine them all together in a combined alliance, and they put all of that power where it needs to be, they are going to end up beating the Russians probably single-handedly. America's kind of just there to help them out, to help them over the top. As far as it goes, however, in East Asia, the primary fighting force involved in a Chinese war with Taiwan would be the Marine Corps and the Navy. The Air Force doesn't have to be that heavily involved. The Navy could actually handle itself in that instance, along with the Marine Corps, because the Marine Corps is now specifically designed, or is becoming specifically designed, due to a new doctrinal concept called Force Design 2030, to be able to be custom tailored to fighting the Chinese in the Pacific around these island regions. The Army would, of course, carry forward the fight in South Korea along with the Republic of Korea's Army, but the Republic of Korea's army is strong enough and powerful enough they can face down the North Koreans entirely on their own and probably hold their own as well. So generally, America is there as a force multiplier in a sense to get everyone over the top and really put the enemy down, but we don't have to be acting like we are literally the savior of the planet, because at the end of the day, our allies are also incredibly strong and can hold the fight on their own. It's just that when we're there, they're not only holding the fight, we're winning the fight because we have overwhelming numbers and firepower everywhere we're present. So that's generally how it would be handled. A lot of people make it sound like we would be overwhelmed in that sort of a situation, but if we really lean with our allies into these situations and we work on them together as friends, as friendly allied nations, we will be able to overcome all these situations and most likely come out on top. And so with that, I hope that does address it the best I can, at least in my opinion. A big thanks to you for the support, that massive support, by the way, 3NDY, and helping this channel to keep on running. And with that, we are on to the next one.
Also, by the way, just a piece of breaking news that's coming out right now. Remember, the Kursk nuclear power plant had a fire reported on it. We reported that in the news segment. And now the Russian air defense forces are reporting they've shot down a Ukrainian drone above the Kursk nuclear power plant. So y'all kind of see where that's going. Like you kind of see the little bit of a concern there with that. But Enforcer, what say you?
That's interesting. I think I'll have to wait to make further comment on that to see what they're going to try and turn that into, but that's interesting. But with that, we are on to the next one.
And this one goes to David, who puts in a 5. And David said, for how much longer precisely can Russia continue to wage war against Ukraine with the resources available as of now and in the near future?
If the war is entirely within Ukraine, they can probably last another year to two at best. Then they'll be collapsing. So with that, I hope that does address that the best I can. A big thanks to you once again for support and help this channel to keep on running. And with that, we are on to the next one.
And we have a 5 from Tyler Harris. And Tyler said, good evening, Enforcers. And do you think Russia would attack the Baltics even though they are losing in Ukraine, and why in LSA?
They might try and attack the Baltics to pretty much either use them as negotiating chips or leverage and threaten nuclear war over the matter, or something along those lines. They'll never attack with the concept of winning in a drawn-out conventional war. They never will. They will lose. So they're going to attack in an attempt to try and escalate into a nuclear conflict and pretty much threaten us that if we don't accept their demands, they're going to try and kill all of us here in the West. That's really what their end goal is. So with that, I hope that does address that well, and a big thanks to you once again for the support. And with that, we are on to the next one.
And we have a $2 support from Robert Krogan. He said, I'm not sure I have anything intelligent to say.
Oh, no, I'm sure you do, Robert. And I thank you for the support and helping the channel to keep on rolling. But I hope you got, I bet you got something intelligent to say. I'm sure you do. And so with that, we are on to the next one.
And we got a $2 support from LSA Sergeant Figment, who said, LSA at the like button, that's an order.
Hey, and that's none other than LSA Sergeant Figment. And we've actually gotten up to 4.3 thousand likes tonight. That is a lot of likes. Holy moly. And I got to thank you so much for the support, LSA Sergeant Figment. I hope some folks do hit the like button a little bit for you, because it always makes us happy to see that. And so a big thanks to you so much once again. I hope that does address that well. And with that, we are on to the next one.
And we have a $2 support from Daniel McMurray, who said LSA. And thank you, Daniel, as well, for that support and also helping to keep the channel running. And with that, folks, it is now time to jump into our live chat questions, our Morse code decoders, and also grab those right now. So our Morse code decoders tonight were Paul Schultz, Kevin J, Mason Miami, Joni Dog, Norm Pritchett, Arab Garbo, Her Royal Fluffiness, Kush, Copioteryx, and Sire, who said the Morse code says, Russia is trying to make Estonia a boogeyman while it's clear they're losing it all, an LLT, LSA.
And that's the sound of money. Y'all got that dead on the nail. That was the Morse code message tonight. I congratulate y'all greatly for getting that correct. The least signal corps always above and beyond. It's amazing, actually. Incredible, really, with what y'all can do and what y'all end up doing every single night. And so a massive thanks to all of y'all so much once again for continuing to get that correct, because I'd have to say, they're trying to make him out to be the boogeyman, but the only thing I see boogieing up in Estonia is the 1st Brigade. They do be boogieing. Oh, get him! Man, the 1st Brigade actually has a pretty cool emblem. But, you know, what's really crazy, man, is that this is the emblem of the 1st Infantry Brigade, if you can see it on screen. The 2nd Infantry Brigade, which is made up entirely of reservists, has probably one of the hardest looking emblems I've ever seen for a brigade anywhere in Europe right now.
Man, it does go hard. They got the real face and a skull, like right next to each other.
Man, split with a sword. Like, it's like that in an olive branch below it. I mean, that is absolutely sick looking. I mean, that actually
doesn't like split personality disorder, I tell you.
but man, anyways, with that, I hope y'all enjoyed that little look. And also, by the way, take a look at this. This is the Estonian Defense Forces emblem. Honestly, Estonia has it going on with the whole symbology, and the General Staff HQ has a great like emblem as well. It's just that the 1st Division is probably the one that I'd say they kind of lacked on a little bit. It's literally just a shield with a big Roman numeral 1 on it. But the rest of them are really cool. Like, they're really neat. Honestly, man, there is a lot of them. Like this, bro, that's sick. Like, that's really cool. And this one, that's really cool too. Or that one. Like, there's a lot of cool military unit emblems out there. But anyways, with that, I hope that does address that well. And it's time for us to get on to the next one.
All right, we have one more super chat that just came in. This one's from Andy Brooks, and he puts in a £5 donation. And thank you very much, Andy, for the £5, and we appreciate that. Now, £5, as they say. But Andy said, do you think the chances of NATO being involved are higher than any other time during the conflict, because things feel a bit more tense than ever?
I would have to say the Operation 1985 Able Archer exercise probably was one of the closest times we came to a full-blown war, because the Russians actually thought that we were preparing in that military exercise to invade them. So they were about to nuke us, like, outright. And also, I would say that the 1962 Cuban Missile Crisis was probably the only other time that I would say that we probably come this close. We've never said this throughout the whole history of the channel. I want to say that as always a disclaimer that we've never been saying this for, like, 3.5 full years. This has only come up within the recent last few months. But with how things are going right now, it's very tense, and I would say it's getting up to that kind of a level from Able Archer in 85 or the missile crisis in 1962. And so with that, I hope that does address that well. And with that, we are on to the next one.
And we also have another super chat. This one's from Dr. Talps, who puts in the 10. And thank you very much, Dr. Talps, for that support. They said, translator lady is probably a Ukrainian sniper.
Maybe. She had that ice cold in her eyes. Very intimidating. Honestly, you would think that someone would keep, like, a slight smile, like, because they're on camera and there's going to be a lot of people watching them. But apparently she wasn't really concerned too much. She was looking to see if you committed the crime that you were blamed for. But a big thanks to you once again for the support and helping this channel to keep on running. And I hope that does address that well. And with that, it's time for us to get on into the live chats. We're going to be getting, due to time constraints, only 3 live chats tonight, and then we're going to be rounding out this stream. And so with that, we are on to the third to last question of the night.
And this one goes to George Tencher. He said, did you guys see the new news about the low-cost cruise missile sale to Ukraine? They're getting upwards of 3,500. They can travel up to 250 miles. They're precise and have a 500-pound warhead. And that is true, George Tencher. We are sending from the United States of America. We secretly did this about a few days back, and they didn't announce it until today. They're sending a bunch of those missiles you're speaking of over to Ukraine that have a longer strike capability into Russia. So that's interesting. Although we are getting conflicting reports that apparently the U.S., at least allegedly, has put restrictions on what weapons can be sent deeper into Russia, and that's been something going on for months. So I'm not really sure what to believe at this point. But Enforcer, what say you?
We did hear about that, and that was very interesting to hear, and hopefully they will be able to use them to their full extent. And so with that, I hope that does address that well. And we also have a 5 from Tyler Harris. And Tyler Harris said, thank you for the explanation. Keep up the great work. I've been watching every night, and you guys are killing it. Thank you for everything. And no problem at all. Thank you so much for enjoying. And we are so happy to know that you find this channel to be of high quality. We try our best every single night. And so with that, a huge thanks to you so much once again. And with that, we are on to the second to last question of the night.
And this one goes to Jezza, who said, how many U.S. and NATO soldiers are actually in Estonia?
There's not a lot of them. Right now, there are about 7,000 fighting force-capable Estonian soldiers that are there. Once I try and make this map available to everyone, there are some units, like everything that I can describe is displayed here under the General Staff and the Estonia Division, talking about units that are not displayed on the map. The Estonian Armed Forces is about, roughly speaking of the whole armed force, about 17,000 strong. 7,000 of those are in the 1st and 2nd Brigades, which are their ground forces or their ground fighting forces. The rest of everyone else in the Estonian Army are in supporting roles, not combatant roles. And there is practically no Air Force in Estonia. So, well, actually, there is no Air Force by real measure in Estonia. It's only training aircraft that have no ability to actually be used in combat. So that's really all that they have. As far as NATO forces that are in Estonia, we have small liaison forces that are there. There's nothing that the United States has that is forward deployed in Estonia that is at a brigade size or even a battalion size. From what we know, it's incredibly small liaison forces, like a company-sized element that is there in Estonia, kind of just watching them conduct training and exercises, and we give them some tips and pointers, and if they've learned anything new, they give us tips and pointers that little liaison group then tells us about to help us improve. But nothing large. Like, there's no real large elements that are in Estonia that can help out. And I see, I always see people saying, no, there's NATO forces in Estonia, and that's true, but let me ask this. What has a lot of power? A brigade of 3,500 men or a company of 100? Clearly, a brigade is going to have a lot more power than 100 men. So Britain and America might have 100 men each in Estonia, but in terms of an actual armed invasion, that's a hill of beans of difference. And not only that, those guys aren't in actual fighting roles, they're liaisons. So they really don't count for much of anything when an actual battle breaks out. So with that, I hope that does address that the best I can, at least from what I know at the moment. And with that, we are on to the final question of the night. So who is lucky last person to throw in the lucky last question of the night?
And that viewer is Kachulian343. He said, do you guys think that if Putin runs out of oil, he'll just resort to sending wave after wave of foot soldiers? Because I do.
Oh, absolutely. Like that's what the North Koreans would do. That's what he would do for sure. But that might not last long because once the oil runs out, their economy collapses overnight, and agriculture completely collapses. A great deal of things collapse. That would probably start to produce such a bad domestic situation inside of Russia. Putin would not be able to survive that for too long. And so with that, I hope that does address that the best I can. And we've reached the end of tonight's stream, folks, at almost 4 hours long. It's 3 hours and 50 minutes long exactly at this point. I got to thank you all so much once again for watching. It has been an absolute honor and a pleasure to be able to run the stream for all of y'all tonight. And we had a peak viewership tonight of 13.6 thousand people, and 115,000 people have watched this stream before it ended. A huge thanks to all of y'all so much once again for helping us to keep this thing rolling and making this thing possible. And of course, we will see you all tomorrow at 10 p.m. Eastern Time to cover the next 24 hours of the news from around the world. And also, if there is a short war video to be made, I'll be the one making it in the middle of the day. And so with that, also really quickly, Jeffrey S. said NATO EFP, Multinational Battalion Battle Group, Estonia. It's a battalion level, however. And like just really quickly to explain that, like just to kind of take a bonus here, a battalion is incredibly small. One of these brigades on this map right now that I have right here, if you read the details, it has at least 8 battalions under its command. That's one brigade. One battalion has maybe 600 guys or less in it, so it's not a lot, and so it doesn't really add a lot to the defensive capabilities of Estonia. But nevertheless, we will see you all tomorrow. Good night, good luck, take care, stay safe, Slava Ukraini, long live the Lee Spring Army, and long live the Republic.
And a good night to all the LSA, by the way, and all 116,000 people that joined us by the end of the stream. A massive audience once again tonight. We're glad for every single one of you for joining us yet again on tonight's stream. And be sure to join the Enforcer tomorrow as well, midday, if there is a short war video. And join us tomorrow at 10 p.m. Eastern for the Sunday night fundraiser stream, where we'll once again raise more money to help those in Ukraine on another Sunday. And we're looking forward to that. And with that, of course, Slava Ukraine, Herum Slava, get some rest, and good night.
To the